We reconvene for Liberty Conspiracy Live here on Rokfin, on Rumble, and on Twitter, and that is also X and YouTube. Thanks for being here, one and all, fellow conspirators all, wherever you are, whatever time zone you call home. Thank you for being here with LG Grande, the big G in Espanol, Gardner Goldsmith, and it is Friday, the 3rd of May, 2024, depending on your time zone. So let's have a great time on this Friday, fellow conspirators, at this place where we gather Monday through Friday to plot and plan and crouch and conspire for the inevitable, we hope, days of greater freedom. Because freedom is out of fashion nowadays. That is for darn sure. We're going to have an awesome time tonight. I hope that you are ready for Friday. And tonight, I'm going to be opening up the lines to you later in the program to talk a little bit about Open Line Friday, my friends, sort of like the Rush Limbaugh tradition, that sort of thing. So I'm very much looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a great time. And if you've got comments about any of the stories that are in the news that we're breaking apart, sucking out that pro-liberty marrow, then that's awesome. If you've got just a reflection of anything that's been going on in your life, if you want to talk about something in your area and pass that on to your friends in the conspiracy, I'd love to hear from you. Just bring it up, and it would be a lot of fun. We won't spend a lot of time with each other chatting and stuff like that, but I do want to open it up a lot more on the show to get your opinions. And if we've got the technology and you're willing to join me, I'd love it. I think it's terrific. So let's get rolling, everybody. Let's find out what's on tap tonight and say hi to everybody in just a minute inside Rokfin, Rumble, X as well. You can drop your comments inside X, and thanks for finding me at Gard Goldsmith. If you're watching after the fact, remember you can watch the program and link up to any of the news stories that I provide in the video feed by pausing it at YouTube and at Rumble, and then sending the link out at that little time code. If you want to find any of the stories in textual form that I'm mentioning in the program, I try to make sure that this Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern Time show is a good news resource for you. So we look at the breaking stories. We try to look back at some of the stories over the past few days to remind ourselves about things. And we also try to offer those things to other people to communicate with each other. And it's a great way to do it, I think, on the X feed. And then on Sundays at my Substack, you can find the Sunday News Assembly, which carries at least 20 stories pertaining to liberty. Plus, now I've been putting in the last month about 2 video links to really good stories from other people who might not have been on the show, but I consider them honorary conspirators for freedom. And so I try to provide information in those forms as well that maybe I haven't been able to cover, but I think, boy, this person just did a bang-up job. I learned so much, that sort of thing. And first off, I just want to mention, if you didn't get a chance to watch Courtney Turner's live stream today, it was phenomenal. Please follow Courtney Turner. She's going to be on the show next month. I'm looking forward to chatting again with Courtney. I've gotten so many great compliments about her as a guest, and she's just great. So, Courtney, if you're watching, hats off to you. I'll put on my Eric Peters cap and take it off to you in your honor. Or I'll put on my Public Image Limited hat. How about that? Pill. Yeah, that's right. This not a love song. Yeah, we're going to have a great time tonight, and we're going to hopefully spread the love to everybody. I want to let you know what's on tap tonight for the program, Liberty Conspiracy 5324. What's on tap tonight? Well, tonight, of course, the news flash. We're starting with the news flash, not the big story tonight. It's the collectivized artwork meets climate cult meets college edition. I know. It's like, what? Somebody mixing their breakfast cereals there? I don't know what this is. Is this like Reese's, peanut butter and chocolate? 2 great tastes that go great together? Well, it's 3 things, and of course, they're all one, really, under collectivism. We'll get into our big first story, which I might actually include as part of our flash. And it's a whopper. You know, it's amazing that was it yesterday or the night before I was mentioning Deb Haaland, the Secretary of the Interior. And yes, she's in the news again for possible corruption. I know, beyond the corruption of the state, corruption within that paradigm where they say, well, within this already corrupt paradigm, we have rules for the mafia. And her department maybe has been breaking some of those rules. I know, shocking when you are looking at an American Indian who evidently was at the White House Correspondents' Dinner and applauding, talking about how wonderful the United States government is, even as it takes more Indian land. In this case, in the Southwest, that would be hallowed Indian religious land so that they can put cables for wind farms through them. And that's not even the corruption we're talking about in this one. So then we'll get into a little bit of a recap for Ukraine. It's a perfect time to do it right now, as the $61 billion, I guess they're going to be buying them lollipops. So it's completely acceptable. They're going to be shipping weapons, of course, into Ukraine. A lot of people are looking at the moves by Zelensky as being maybe motions of desperation. The French and other European nation states like Germany are saying, oh, wow, maybe we ought to go in there and have a lot more fun too. Not a good idea. We're going to look back a little bit with some very good minds at the corruption of Ukraine in the most recent decade and a half. It goes back further than that, but some really good reminders there that it is in video form, and I can't wait to show you. Also, Israel to expand targets if the International Criminal Court accuses Netanyahu of being a criminal. Is that what they're going to do? They're going to engage in more criminal activity? You better not call that peaceful Benjamin Netanyahu, that innocent Benjamin Netanyahu, a criminal. You better not accuse him of that. Really? What are you going to do? We're going to attack more innocent people. I mean, just don't do it. Okay. I see. Well, as Sammy Davis Jr. said at the beginning of every episode of Beretta, this is for you, Benjamin Netanyahu. Don't do the crime if you can't do the time. Yeah, don't do it. Keep your eye on the sparrow there, buddy. Then we're going to be going a little bit into some history about the ICC, just as a reminder, just to make sure you've got the documentation in front of you. Remember, I mentioned over there yesterday, night before maybe, and then a few weeks ago that the United States and Israel are not signatories to the ICC. I brought it up in the context of showing Benjamin Netanyahu as he was talking about how amazingly, stunningly, shockingly ridiculous it is, and how sadistically ironic it is. Of course, I'm using many more words than he did. He must get paid in some other way. I get paid by the word, right, guys? My staff is applauding. I know you can't hear them. They're over in the corner. But anyway, he's like, it's incredible. The ICC was created as a result of the Holocaust after what was done to the Jews. So you signed on to the ICC from the state of Israel, the so-called Jewish state? Oh, you didn't. That's right. And neither did the United States. And now you're upset. You're trying to use the ICC's connection as an outgrowth of the Holocaust to make sure that that wouldn't happen again. Now you're saying that you are like the Jews of the past, that you're being put upon by the very thing that was created to try to prosecute people for going after Jews. It's ironic that you're not a party to the very thing that you say is so wonderful, or were saying until it was directed at you. I mean, the hypocrisy is stunning, you guys. It's incredible. And we'll look at Fiction Friday. Tonight, Fiction Friday will be a little bit different, because I want to look at the actual industry of book publishing. It's a very good piece on Substack I want to share with you. And also want to talk by the end of the night, want to talk a little bit more about tariffs, add that little bit more to tariffs that I discussed last night, and how, as you'll see right here, they often hinge on trade deficit mythology. So we'll tell you about that. We'll tell you about the balance of trade and so on and so forth very, very soon. Let me say hello to everybody. Big time hello to everybody watching on X. Please hit the thumbs up and recycle it if you can, and spread it to some other people. Tag them and say, hey, check out this show. I think it's kind of fun. And then there's Harry Hart inside Rokfin. I'll be dropping the link inside Rokfin, and I'll probably put it in Rumble as well for the chat. I don't know whether I'll be able to get it into YouTube. Then Tom Cooper is there. Hey, Tom, good to see you, man. And I want to say hi to the folks at Rumble. And thank goodness we were able to go live on Rumble. There wasn't any glitch, as Killing Joke would say. They got a great song called Glitch. It's epically awesome. Birdhouse Blues is there. Hey, Birdhouse. All right. All right. Oh, Birdhouse, you're putting in All By Myself by Eric Carmen. Oh, what a sad song, huh? Thank you for being there, Birdhouse. Oh, man, that is funny. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Live chat equals one person. Well, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. And hopefully, I see. I know what's going on. We're on the Gardner Goldsmith channel. So let me do this. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to switch it out because we are on right now the Gardner Goldsmith channel, and I'll switch it over to the other channel. So you'll be all set. And let me just check this out here. And we'll go like this. And it's switching over to the Liberty Conspiracy channel right now, buddy. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'll talk to the staff about that one. I'm sure they were probably working on that right on the side. So thank you, Birdhouse. That's super cool. And welcome to everybody watching on the Liberty Conspiracy channel now. Very cool. We had that super special exclusive opening over at the Gardner Goldsmith channel, huh? Don't you feel special you got to watch that? I know. That's good stuff. All right, so let's get rolling on the show, everybody. 13 minutes after 6 o'clock, if you're just joining us on Rumble. That's the second night that perhaps the Liberty Conspiracy channel has been delayed a little bit. So if you were watching on the Gardner Goldsmith channel, you saw the whole thing. I know, very tempting, right? But thanks for joining us, and please spread the word big time. Hand out those links. Keep throwing them out there. That's a really big deal, especially when you start off with something weird that goes on like that. Right now, let's get into the weirdness that comes down to us from space that tells us we're getting into the newsflash territory. It's time, my friends, to hear from the mothership.
None of us were allowed on at all.
This is are you a student?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm a paid student.
Okay,
right?
you're a student.
Yeah.
Okay. This is your campus.
Yeah.
You should own that right. Okay. You are allowed to access that lawn whenever you want.
Yes? Oh, hello. Hello. We're Mary's parents. Oh, well, come on in, fellas. Hold it a second. Mary's parents burned to death last year. Wait a minute. I know you guys. You're from the news flash.
And how do we start, my friends? We start with the sounds of drums and the telltale sound of James Williamson on guitar about rights. In this case, it's the right to move from Iggy and the Stooges. It's called I Got a Right, but we're applying it everywhere, my friends. Newsflash time with Iggy. We'll go with this. Yeah, Iggy and the Stooges. This is probably one of the best songs of the Stooges among many, 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 many. And it's a great theme for natural rights, my friends. And at that moment when he goes, Eeyow! And they go, it's just like he's diving off a stage, baby. Just like he's diving off a stage. Man, that's good stuff. Iggy and the Stooges. And of course, you can find that on the EP called I'm Sick of You. But yeah, it's on a bunch of collections and so on and so forth. It was sort of a hidden gem for the Iggy and the Stooges fans for a long time. But Iggy Pop, yep, straight out of Michigan. Iggy and the Stooges, the man with a professional golfing handicap, could have been a pro golfer because his family lived right on the edge of a golf course. And he used to go play with his dad all the time. All right, let's talk about rights right now. How about the prime right, the right to life? How about that one? Well, the governor of Arizona doesn't seem to be very consistent about that. In fact, let's take a look at what we were saying in the billboard of the program, everybody. Yes, the billboard of the program. Let's talk a little bit about that governor and how she doesn't seem to understand what natural rights are. But first, before we even do that, let's talk about the universities and the protests and go into a little bit of collectivization as we look at that preview from the news flash. And we see that when we go with collectives, we see that they just can't seem to manage collectives. We're going to hit that, and then we'll talk about the collective artwork, and then we'll go into the Arizona story. I think that's a good one. So I'll push off the natural rights things for just a minute. Check this out. This is at Columbia, and I don't know exactly what the status is right now of the protesters at Columbia, but we can see right in that preview that we saw during the news flash cuts that there's a problem with the collective. So let's look at this title. Thousands descend in Columbia campus as faculty blocks encampment entrance. And let's hear from these people.
Are you discriminating against us as students at this university right now? Three friends who are now back there. Get this. Those two girls. We tried to enter the lawn. They would not let us enter the lawn. As you can see, they both have visible Star David. Star David necklaces. I think that might, I can't read their minds. They're not willing to say anything. But they wouldn't let us onto the lawn. I stood here for 5 minutes. We all faced each other. They were doing some weird human chain. I called the police. They heard me call the police. I'd say about 5 minutes after I called the police, I called again. The minute I started calling again, they said, students are now allowed on the lawn.
Are you aware though that none of us were allowed on campus at all?
This is are you a student?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm a fake student.
Okay, you're a student.
Yes.
Okay. This is your campus.
Yeah.
You should own that right. Okay. You are allowed to access that lawn whenever you want. I don't think if they tell you that all students are allowed on, right? Because there are people on it right now. They're obviously discriminating against certain ones. They also are letting people in, and were letting people in when I got here, and then they stopped.
Okay, so once more, welcome to Marshville, Alabama. That's exactly what happens when you collectivize property. They are getting government grants. Now, those people aren't considering that. He asks her, are you a student here? Well, then that's your campus. But it's everybody's campus who pays taxes. So this is the problem. They are getting upset, and you've got sides arguing over how it's going to be run. So as we saw some people bashing windows in. Well, what if their taxes paid for those windows and they don't want the windows there anymore, right? They actually entered and went into one of the offices. Was that at Columbia or UCLA? I think it was at Columbia, right? So how do you manage it? Well, neither of those people is understanding the lesson. Maybe they haven't been discussing the fact that there are all sorts of federal subsidies and government subsidies. And as Judge Napolitano mentioned, in Columbia, New York has a statute that says the colleges have to be seen as, you got it, the public place, the commons. Well, if you remove the government funding from them, the subsidies, they wouldn't be, and they shouldn't be. And then it would be up to the people who sign up to it and the people who decide, I don't like their policies or I do like their policies. And the universities could be exclusive as much as they wanted to. And nobody could say, hey, you're immorally taking my money and now I can't access this place, which is exactly the valid complaint that those students have. Whether they're arguing over apples and oranges doesn't matter. The subject matter, and as inflammatory as it is, doesn't make a difference. It's the immorality that is the construct, the basis of the problem. It's the taking of the money that opens it up to the tragedy of the commons. Now let's take another look at another story of the tragedy of the commons. We're going to talk about artwork. And I'll go to the Arizona story in just a minute. Artwork. Now, this says climate activist sentenced to prison after vandalizing 142-year-old work of art. Okay. Now, I think many of us, especially if we disagree with the opinions of the climate cult, would find it pretty offensive that they're attacking artwork. However, if they are taxpayers, guess what? This isn't a private gallery. That's right. It's a government-run museum. Climate activists have recently taken, Climate activists have recently taken to destroying, and it's one of these flip things, so it's annoying. So I got to pause it here. Okay. A climate activist who vandalized a piece of art in the National Gallery of Art in Washington will face a 60-day prison sentence. She has been ordered to pay a fine for damaging the piece. Meanwhile, her accomplice is set to appear in court in August of 2024. So there you see the slideshow shot, the GAF slideshow. There they are, right? The accomplices. Okay. So they're both upset, and one of them is going to have to go to prison for 60 days because that person went into the National Gallery of Art. Now, some people would say, how dare that person? That's all of ours. So in other words, what you're saying is those people, too, who could claim that that is partially theirs, now have to weigh their opinions about the artwork with yours. What if the majority actually decided, you know what, we want to throw paint all over that? You'd be out, right? Then you'd be the troublemaker. These people happen to be on the outs because the court said you can't go into that government-run building, and you can't do that. Why not? They're paying for the government-run building. This is now artwork that's been collectivized. What if they think that that artwork is, because their tax money is paying to support it and keep it up and keep it safe, what if they think it'd be better with paint smeared all over it as a new form of art, a protest? Just like the people who bashed in the glass to get into one of the college buildings might say, let's say Jill Stein wanted to be incredibly violent, and I don't think she would ever be this way. Let's say they say, I've been paying thousands of dollars a year of taxes, right? Even if it's $20 or $100, is that sufficient to say I can now break this window pane? The problem is the precept. The problem is the illegitimate foundation of the assumption that people's money can be taken from them, and then their opinions can't be heard over the management of that. That somehow, if the majority decides it, that makes it acceptable, that their money can still be taken, even though they don't want it used for that. So all you have to do is flip it around. You can say the same way that you can answer the problem with the universities, you can answer the problem with the art galleries. What if somebody doesn't even want that piece of art paid for? What if they don't like that piece of art, right? Art is a subjective thing. What if they don't want that piece of artwork in there and they don't want their tax money taken for that? Well, you privatize the art museums, right? Now, some people say, oh, but you have to retain culture. Whose culture? Who's determining? Again, it's the tragedy of the commons. It's all, and then it becomes rent seeking because you have ideologies, you have artists, you have different businesses and corporations that want to get on the government gravy train. And even in some cases, you have Jackson Pollock subsidized by the CIA. How about we don't do that? That would be awesome. How about we don't give money to Piss Christ, right? How about we don't have a national endowment of the arts? And how about we also don't have a national gallery in Washington, D.C.? That would be nice. That would solve a lot of these problems. At least I wouldn't have to feel conflicted, and I obviously don't, but I don't have to feel conflicted about seeing these people forcibly paying taxes into a system and then having some crazy idea that they're going to have a protest there, which means that you're going to have to clean the glass and clean the marble stand and all that stuff, right? They didn't actually destroy the artwork, but some people might say, well, gee, the marble stand is beautiful. I mean, if you really want to extrapolate, right? So many things that artisans do and engineers do are works of art, right? So some people might see the interior of the building that supports the museum pieces as being works of art as well. Look at the work that Constantine Brumidi did inside the Capitol building, inside the rotunda. All the ironwork inside the rotunda was done by one guy and a few people on his team. His name was Constantine Brumidi. He came from Italy, and all he asked for payment, he didn't take any money, was that he could become an American citizen. So when you go on the rotunda, that was all done basically by one guy. So I appreciate that. I think it's artistic. I think it's beautiful. I don't want to spend somebody else's tax money on it. And that's the problem, right? That is a major, major problem. We run into this all the time. Whether it's government artwork and museums or it's government lands. Now let's take a look, and I could play the courtroom drama theme, at Deb Haaland. Here's the latest one about the Department of the Interior's secretary. This comes from Eric Scheiner, the director of MRC TV. It was published today. Biden Interior Secretary denies she's in charge when questioned on corruption. Now, I have major disagreements with Josh Hawley over certain things, especially about Israel and the military-industrial complex and what is or is not anti-Semitism. I think it's very clear where he stands. But he has done a good job grilling Deb Haaland here. And if you're listening on freeworld.fm, her last name is spelled Haaland, Holland, and she is an American Indian. So this is a quote from Eric. He opens the piece with, "So you're not in charge of the department? Oh my gosh, I thought you were in charge." Senator Josh Hawley, Republican of Missouri, said to Interior Secretary Deb Haaland after she avoided questions of possible corruption in her department. The explosive questioning, and that's the corruption over and above the existence of the department. The explosive questioning took place during a Senate Appropriations Committee meeting Thursday. Quote, "Your leadership has met with the Wilderness Society." They met with the Wilderness Society when that group was a plaintiff suing the Department of the Interior with an adverse lawsuit against you. And they met with this society off the books. I've got the emails, Hawley said. Now, further details, if you're wondering about this, Eric's got it covered. In July of 2021, said Hawley, after you had come to office, members of the Wilderness Society, when they're suing the department, write to your top deputy and ask for a meeting to keep it off the calendar. Here it is, July 14th, Bastille Day, 2021. Can we set up a meeting with these folks July 19th, 2021? They propose how they might calibrate this so it doesn't look like they're violating any of the rules of the court, says Hawley. And remarkably, it stays completely off everybody's calendars. So they had a secret meeting with people with whom they were already in litigation. And they didn't tell the court. And Hawley says, and we only know about it because FOIA requests were filed. And then after they have these off-the-books meetings, their request is to cancel the mineral leasing rights in Minnesota in the Superior National Forest, Hawley continued. You do that. A few months later, you do that. You cancel the leases, and then you withdraw 225,000 acres of critical mining from production and leasing shortly after that. Is it common practice at your department to meet with dark money groups off the books and conceal it from the public? Writes Eric. Haaland attempted to avoid the question. Senator, thank you for the question. And of course, I can't answer if you're referring to our former deputy secretary. He's no longer at the department. And he says, Hawley, he worked for you. I'm paraphrasing. He says, who worked for you? He worked for you, Hawley interjected. He worked for the president, says Haaland. He was appointed by the president. And then Hawley says, he's your deputy secretary. Are you the secretary of the Department of the Interior? I thought that's why you were here. Are you the secretary? Don't look at her. Look at me. Are you the secretary? I am, Haaland said. Do these people who are sitting here today answering most of your questions, do they work for you? Do they report to you? You're not in charge? Hawley pressed. They work for me, Haaland replied. They work for you. So you're not in charge of the department? Hawley stated. And I'm going to play the explosive back and forth video. So clearly the Wilderness Society was bringing suit because they didn't want this excavation, this utilization of this land in Minnesota. Leasing rights in the Superior National Forest. And the Interior Department had a secret meeting with them outside the court. Now, it's one thing for businesses to say, we're going to go to outside adjudication, right? We're going to hire some outside adjudicator to handle this, arbitration, something like that. Make a public announcement about it. Your shareholders know about it. Your customers know about it. the business that's adjudicating it, the arbitrator, can announce it, unless you've got some sort of gag clause and you're just doing it secretly. This is the United States government. They're using your money. They're getting sued, and then they work out the lawsuit in the favor of the people suing. And here's how Josh Hawley took it with Holland.
Secretary Holland, do you know the group called the Wilderness Society?
I've heard of it, yes.
And what, to your knowledge, what is this group?
It sounds like the name is explanatory.
Well, let me help you a little bit. It's a left-wing environmentalist pressure group. Do you know who funds them?
I do not.
Well, I can help you with that too. It's funded in large part by a foreign billionaire, Hans-Jörg Weiss, who has routed his money through all manner of dark money groups, including the Arabella Network. Hans-Jörg Weiss was investigated by the FEC for illegal campaign contributions because he's not a United States citizen. He sits on the governing council of this dark money environmentalist group. Has anybody in leadership at your department met with them, the Wilderness Society?
Senator, I do not know this individual, and
Has anybody in leadership at your department met with the Wilderness Society?
Well, I'm sure we've met with a lot of groups and organizations in the work that we do, and we're discussing the environment.
So does that mean you don't know, or you're not going to answer my
I
question?
don't have a full list of everyone
Okay.
that everyone has met with. But
Well, I can help you with that
I have a specific
I can help you with that
question.
as well. The answer is yes. Your leadership has met with the Wilderness Society. They met with the Wilderness Society when that group was a plaintiff suing the Department of the Interior with an adverse lawsuit against you, and they met with them off the books. I've got the emails. In July of 2021, after you had come to office, members of the Wilderness Society, when they're suing the department, write to your top deputy and ask for a meeting to keep it off of his calendar. Here it is, July 14th, 2021. Can we set up a meeting with these folks? July 19th, 2021, they propose how they might calibrate this so it doesn't look like they're violating any of the rules of the court. And remarkably, it stays completely off of everybody's calendars. We only know about it because FOIA requests were filed. And then after they have these off the books meetings, their request is to cancel the mineral leasing rights in Minnesota in the Superior National Forest. This is a critical minerals mine. The society wants the mine shut down. After they meet off the books with your leadership, you do it. A few months later, you do it. You cancel the leases, and then you withdraw 225,000 acres of critical mining from production and leasing shortly after that. Is it common practice at your department to meet with dark money groups off the books and conceal it from the public?
Senator, thank you for the question. And of course, I can't answer to, if you're referring to our former deputy secretary, he's no longer at the department.
Who works for you?
He worked for the president. He was appointed by the president.
He's your deputy secretary. Are you the secretary of the Department of Interior? I thought that's why you were here. Are you the secretary? Don't look at her, look at me.
Yes.
Are you the secretary?
I am.
Do these people who are sitting here today answering most of your questions, do they work for you?
They work.
Do they report for you? You're not in charge?
They work with me.
They work with
They
you.
work
So
with
you're not in
me.
charge of the department. Oh my gosh, I thought you were in charge. I thought that's why you were here.
We work as a team.
Oh, okay. So who's in charge then?
I provide the vision. I provide the overall direction and
But you're not in charge.
our mission.
Do you take responsibility for what happens
I
at the
take-
Department of the Interior?
Take responsibility.
Do you take full responsibility for what happens at the Department of the Interior? Good. Then why are your leadership meeting with dark money groups and concealing it from the public? Why are they doing it off the books? How many times has this happened?
All right, so I'll stop it there because I think there's a valid point to be made here that Mr. Hawley keeps bringing up the dark money groups, this sinister sounding term, when those dark money groups might be much more transparent and much more honest than the process by which the United States government takes people's money and runs that land, claims control of that land, right? So at least these dark money groups, in many cases, are not operating through taxation. They're only taking advantage of the end product of the taxation, the management of the land at the end. They want what they want done. And again, we go to the tragedy of the commons, whether it's artwork or colleges or the land that the government claims to control. Not everybody, including this Wilderness Society organization or the people who want the mineral rights, are going to be satisfied. The way that you show valuation is by allowing people to voluntarily show where they value their money. So the dark money terminology, the darker money is the tax money that's forcibly taken from people. I wish more people would see that and see how that leads to these sorts of arguments and debates and problems. And yes, I think there is criticism that should be leveled against Deb Haaland and the way she answers the questions. But I think substantively and intellectually, there is an argument to be made that Mr. Hawley could make a more profound and understandable argument if he were to look at the Constitution and then look at deeper morality. The Constitution doesn't allow for the government to control any of those lands. And morally, it's just not proper to take dark money away from people, to take money away in a dark fashion called taxation. So now, one final bit to talk about subsidies and taxation and how things just get locked in. If you think about the Antiquities Act under Teddy Roosevelt, totally unconstitutional, should never have happened. But ever since that time, they've had national parks, they've had national monuments, all these things. And of course, as I mentioned, when Bill Clinton created the Grand Escalante National Park, that closed off a humongous portion of clean burning anthracite, except for one company. I think it was the husband of Dianne Feinstein or one of the other senators from California at the time. He had a mine in that area, in the Grand Escalante area in the Southwest. They gave him a grandfather clause so he could continue mining. And when they shut that down, the world's largest portion of anthracite then became owned by the Lippo Group, which had given tons of money to Bill Clinton to help him get elected. They were based out of Indonesia. And it just so happens that, of course, Bill Clinton was the one who created the Grand Escalante Park, which then gave the advantage to the Lippo Group. I know it's incredible when government runs land because you know it's just going to go exactly the way people want it and it won't be gamed at all for rent seeking. Now let's look at how things like the Antiquities Act are mirrored by other things that once they start, they never stop. They just keep going and going and going. Government goes way beyond the ever-ready bunny. Here it is, folks. The FCC's Affordable Connectivity Program should end. This is from National Review. I think it's Veronique Derugi. She writes this. I have testified a bunch of times. And by the way, what is affordable connectivity? Well, for that, we got to go way back to the annals of time. 2.5 years, almost 2 years. I have testified a bunch of times before Congress about various government programs and their efficiencies. And more often, I've testified about their lack of efficiencies. I'm expanding a little bit. She wrote, and their efficiencies and more often their lack thereof. One very common pattern I've observed is that legislators tout as successes the mere existence of government subsidies. The mere existence they tout as success, or the fact that the beneficiaries of subsidies and other handouts enjoy getting free money from the government. So they put it forward as the government subsidies exist, that's a success, or that the people who receive the handouts are happy that they're getting something. They've helped those people, of course. That's what they say. They're beneficent with your money. Isn't that wonderful? They can look so nice. This is exactly, writes Veronique Derugi, this is exactly what happened this morning during testimony before the Senate Budget Committee on Commerce on the pandemic-era boondoggle, way back in the annals of time, called the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program. Remember that? I do. I didn't until until she had brought it up. It would have passed through my mind. I would have forgotten about it. Somebody brings it up, you're like, oh yeah, I remember that. And later it was rebranded. I know, so it could be perpetuated, the Affordable Connectivity Program. So at first it was under the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program. And then Of course, just like the rural electrification program that was started under FDR, and they kept expanding it, and it kept going even to the 80s when I was seeing their gatherings. I was covering it when I was there in 1989. Yeah, literally 50 some years later, they're talking about connecting people to the electric grid in farms. Now that, 99% of the people had farms, what were they doing? They were subsidizing the farmers' electric bills. That's what it morphed into. It became a subsidy. It already was a subsidy. If you want to get phone service, you get the phone service yourself, right? Well, of course, starting in World War I, they gave Bell Telephone a monopoly on telephone service, of course, for security reasons. And then that monopoly was perpetuated all through the way through to the 80s until AT&T was split up into the Baby Bells. You had 9X in New England. That's the New England, New York exchange. You had Pacific Bell, Pac Bell. That was over on the West Coast and so on. So most of them have reunited under Verizon now. But it's a similar thing with this term, emergency broadband benefit program. This is the pattern. This is what everybody can learn about these government programs. Once they're started, they just don't stop. And then they rebrand them. They give them new names. So it's no longer termed emergency broadband. It's now termed affordable connectivity. So it'll be there forever. And, writes Veronique DeRugi, this program extends $30 a month to qualifying beneficiaries of internet service. During the hearing, Democrat members and witnesses made various arguments for the program based on the fact that beneficiaries are happy to get some money to pay for their internet service. Isn't that wonderful? They're happy to get it. They're happy. The number of people benefiting from the program was also used as evidence that the program was necessary. Get it? Ah, yes, self-perpetuating. We're going to give it to 1,000 people. Okay, next year. Oh, you can't cut this. 1,000 people get this. Oh, and they're happy about it. Oh, well, okay. Yeah, I get it. All right, totally fine then. Keep picking my neighbor's pocket. Go for it, man. I'll give you one of those extendo arms. It'll be working out great. You'd be like Inspector Gadget for evil. We also heard, she writes, it argued that without the money, these beneficiaries, often members of minorities, seniors, tribal communities, or members of the military, would lose connectivity. Of course, we were warned that this loss would damage the entire economy. What we didn't hear from them was the question of whether the money used for these subsidies might be put to better use elsewhere, or whether the government is the best means of delivering the desired outcome of broadband affordability. How about if it's even constitutional or moral in the first place? That's one of the places where National Review usually misses the boat there. She writes, I was therefore glad to read and listen to the testimony of the Economic Policy Innovation Center's Paul Winfrey, who addressed many of these issues. For instance, he explained why a subsidy is the least effective route to provide broadband affordability and why such subsidies could backfire. As he noted, the surest way to make broadband services better and their prices lower is, you got it, ding, ding, number one answer, market competition. He also explained that existing regulations are raising broadband prices. Existing regulations, raising prices. Wait till you see what happens with net neutrality. So, even if we assume that all those households that do not have broadband lack it because it's not affordable to them, deregulation would go much further than would subsidies in making broadband more affordable. Besides, Winfrey provides data to show that the ACP, as it's now called, has in fact increased the price of internet services and is therefore contributing to the problem. Yeah, you're subsidizing demand. He also outlined the fact that, as is almost always the case with government handouts, the ACP subsidies are being paid to many people who already have broadband. He writes, for instance, quote, the FCC has said that a goal of ACP is to close the digital divide for low-income consumers. However, most ACP subsidies are going to households who already have broadband. FCC surveys have found that around 80% of ACP recipients already had broadband before the subsidy. But let me ask you, if 80% didn't, if 100% didn't, would it make any moral difference? No. Stop there. Don't even have to think about it. You move on from there. Now, let's get into this final story about rights. And let me make sure I've got the video for you here, because this is the one about Arizona. Anytime I want, I got a right to move. And here we go. We're going to go back to that college and Israeli thing as well. We're going to flip that out into a larger expanse, into analyzing the world in just a moment, because, of course, they are arguing about something that is on a lot of people's minds, what's going on in Israel, of course, in Gaza, I should say, because of Israel. But in the United States, more flips of reality, not just in Israel. More flips of reality, more subversion of morality, and negation of the Hippocratic Oath. So let me show you what I've got. The governor of Arizona signed into law, into executable statute, the repeal of the 1864 near total abortion ban. And listen to her words. I think you probably know where she's going to go. I'll just give you the hint. Doctors doing their important work. Ready?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. Almost a month ago, I stood in this very room detailing the dangers of the Arizona Supreme Court's decision to uphold the 1864 total abortion ban. In the weeks since, we've seen women and healthcare providers suffer from the chaos and confusion caused by this ruling. I've heard from doctors who are unsure if they would wind up in a jail cell for simply doing their job. Women who told me they didn't know if it was safe to...
Let's pause it right there. For simply doing their job. I'll show the rest of this in a minute, but if your mind works like my mind, I ask myself, so is there some debate as to doctors who are perhaps maybe performing surgeries that are, as we often hear, required to save the life of the mother in that very, very rare instance? No, we're not. In fact, because let me give you some information about this. All right. Let me see. Where's the piece? Yeah, it's right here. This is from the Associated Press, of all things, and this is what I showed you a little bit before. Arizona's Democrat governor signs a bill to repeal 1864 ban on most abortions. Now, if you scroll down a little bit here, of course, they phrase it in a very strange way at first. They say, Democrat Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs, wink, wink, has relegated a Civil War era ban on most abortions to the past by signing a bill Thursday to repeal it. Hobbs says the move is just the beginning of a fight to protect reproductive health care in Arizona. The repeal of the 1864 law that the state Supreme Court recently reinstated won't take effect until 90 days after the legislative session ends, which typically happens in June or July. Now we get a little bit deeper here. Abortion rights advocates say they're hopeful a court will step in to prevent what could be a confusing landscape of access for girls and women across Arizona as laws are introduced and then reversed. Well, those abortion rights advocates are not just immoral, talking about the so-called right to kill another person in the womb, but they're also implying that people who aren't even 18 should be able to kill a body that is growing inside them, another human being. The effort to repeal the long dormant law, which bans all abortions, this is the key, which bans all abortions except those done to save a patient's life. Let me show you that. The effort to repeal the long dormant law, which bans all abortions except those done to save the patient's life, won final legislative approval Wednesday, 16-14 in the Senate, as 2 GOP lawmakers join with Democrats. Shame on them if you are a statist. I am not a statist, but they don't seem to recognize that they also seem to support statutes to protect other people outside the womb from attacks against their lives. So if they're going to be consistent and if they're going to conform to the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause, then they have to apply those statutes to fetuses because they are human beings. But they won't. And even when you show it to them, they don't want to hear it. I think it's fairly obvious that it's too logical, and they don't want to have to apply their minds to a consistent form of morality. But that point about the doctors saving the patient's life, that is the exception. It's a ban of abortions. They say, of course, here, which bans all abortions except those done to save a patient's life. So what exactly is the governor saying here when she says this? I'm curious about it.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. Almost a month ago, I stood in this very room detailing the dangers of the Arizona Supreme Court's decision to uphold the 1864 total abortion ban. In the weeks since, we've seen women and healthcare providers suffer from the chaos and confusion caused by this ruling. I've heard from doctors who are unsure if they would wind up in a jail cell for simply doing their job.
Okay. That is quite an amazing way to minimize the taking of a human life, isn't it? Simply for doing their job. I think it's fairly clear that if a doctor is going to perform an abortion based on the 1864 statute that says it's only if the life of the mother is in danger, it's pretty clear, right? Now, maybe there are some fudge lines there, but I don't think that's what she's talking about here. I think she's saying that the doctors consider the easy abortion simply doing their job. And I also am amazed by all of these women. Only two guys there. It's always like this. It's always women. Every one of these women and the guys, they were all of their flesh and blood. Is it somehow different? Is it somehow separated and not on the long course from the very moment of their conception? Does it not exist because of that moment? The flesh, the blood, the blood coursing through their veins, the very actions they can take with the bodies that they've got right there. Are they not connected to that moment of conception? Because if they can deny that, then they've got to explain to me how they just popped out of nothingness, how they just exist somehow through some great will of their own. They popped into existence. I don't know how that works. Very clearly, they grew from the moment of conception. The flesh they have is mechanically connected to that spark of life. And when somebody else severs it, that's called killing a human being. So these people can dance around it all they want, but they're messing with the definition of murder. They are conflicting their own positions with the 14th Amendment, and they're disturbing the very concept of the Hippocratic Oath. So, with that stated, let's now go into our next story. And I want to welcome everybody, and thank you also for joining us at Rumble. Want to get into your comments in just a minute, but right now, I have one more story on the news flash. I can't forget this one. This is a big one. No. Yeah, I already covered it. Sorry, I already covered it. It was the climate one. Yeah. Let's go into the world, into the big war stories right now. And for that, we're going to go with our crazy, oddball, really cool, fake band that XTC posed as, to leave that clunkily there. XTC posing as the Dukes of Stratosphere with their fake 60s psychedelic "My Love Explodes" warmongers. Yeah, just you. Oh, baby. Yeah. I love the takeoff of the Disraeli Gears cover there, too. It's just so funky. And they went by all the crazy names like Sir John Johns and the Red Curtain. It's awesome. Yes, the Dukes of Stratosphere from their EP 25 O'Clock. So let's go back to the protesters and look at that university again. Now, we've touched on the topic of the problem of the protests, and it could be a protest about teddy bears versus stuffed turtles, whatever it is, chocolate versus vanilla, oranges and apples, whatever it is, once you governmentize what is the property, then people with different opinions over how that property should be used are going to be fighting with each other. And that's exactly what happened. As this guy said, well, this is your campus, right? But let's get into the subject they're discussing a little bit as well.
Are you discriminating against us as students at this university right now? Friends who are now back there, those two girls, we tried to enter the lawn. They would not let us enter the lawn. As you can see, they both have visible Star Davids. They're both wearing Star David necklaces. I think that might have, I can't read their minds. They're not willing to say anything, but they wouldn't let us onto the lawn. I stood here for 5 minutes. We all faced each other. They were doing some weird human chain. I called the police. They heard me call the police. I'd say about 5 minutes after I called the police, I called again. The minute I started calling again, they said, students are now allowed on the lawn.
Are you aware though that none of us were allowed on campus at all?
This is are you a student?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm a paid student.
Okay,
Right?
you're a student.
Yes.
Okay? This is your campus.
Yeah.
You should own that right. Okay? You are allowed to access that lawn whenever you want. I don't care if they tell you that all students are allowed on, right? Because there are people on it right now. They're obviously discriminating against certain ones. They also are letting people in, and were letting people in when I got here, and then they stopped.
All right, so we've got his argument. Now that guy feels like he's got a valid claim to be out there on the lawn, on the property. He's a student, she's a student. You've got a right to be there. You're paying, but so are the taxpayers because they subsidize Columbia. They subsidize virtually every university except a couple like Hillsdale and Grove City, right? Even Harvard, even Yale, even Stanford, they get massive grants. They've got massive contracts. DARPA is connected with MIT. So we know how deep their connections are. We also know that there are stresses on the administrators in these schools because the trust that they've got, the different investors they've got are highly connected to either Israel or the military-industrial complex. But at the same time, they've got the young students who are recognizing what's going on in Israel. Then, of course, you've got other pro-Zionist, pro-state Israeli people who are saying, I think the state of Israel somehow is emblematic of the Semitic peoples. That's incorrect. They think so. They have a right to be wrong as long as they're not demanding that somebody else pay for their incorrect stance, right? That applies to anybody. You don't have a right to force anybody to pay for a correct stance, in your opinion. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You don't have the right to force anybody else to pay. That's the point. And so all of these collectivist ideas, and even the abortion issue, because I'm an anarchist, even the abortion issue, that becomes problematic itself if they are having statutes paid for by the taxpayers to create police forces to protect people from aggression by others. But of course, under the 14th Amendment, they don't apply them equally. They don't protect people equally under the law, which the 14th Amendment demands. But I think just on a matter of simple ethics, people can recognize that, right? They would say, yeah, if you've got the law, you don't want to have application of the law unequally, right? Which is one of the reasons that they put the 14th Amendment out there, because lynchings against some people were not being prosecuted the way they would prosecute other violent attacks. They were not being prosecuted against Black people when Black people were being lynched in the Jim Crow South. So even before Jim Crow South, typically in the antebellum era. So you see them, they put forward the 14th Amendment. The states don't abide by it because they want to be selective, because, of course, abortion is such a hot button issue. It gets everybody arguing, right? It's very clear that logically life begins at conception. But I'm an anarchist, so I also understand that I don't want to engage in group pointing of guns at people to say, I want to create the police force that will protect all the lives. That's hypocritical of me. I'm engaging in aggression and theft to do it. I can't do that. So this is the problem with the enforcement of all the statutes that are supposedly there to protect human beings, and the equal protection and application of those statutes onto fetuses. Because the fetuses are innocent, of course, because they're defenseless, of course, one wants, I would hope, to protect the fetuses. But I can't want to protect the fetuses so much that I'm going to force my neighbor at the point of a gun to say, you're going to pay for what I want. It doesn't mean that I don't hold any less firmly to my belief that the fetus is a living human being. It's just that I also hold firmly to the belief that I don't have a right to take my neighbor's money. So, they're very consistent. You got to, I'm hoping to try to be as consistent as possible. And here with the university, again, it shouldn't matter what they're arguing, right? It just so happens that what they're arguing about Israel, the people who want to get on that campus and be there and get rid of the Palestinian people in some cases, the pro-Palestinian protesters in some cases, and are calling in the cops to do so, that sort of thing, when most of the protests are innocent. But as I said, over time, it's going to get muddier and muddier as various agents provocateurs and various groups get paid to go in there, and people get upset, they get inflamed and angry. You're never going to know who really started what. But one thing you do know is who started what in the Middle East. And another thing you do know is I shouldn't have to be arguing about that because I don't have to be roped into that. I have a moral prerogative to not be roped into that. I'm an individual human being. So the same way you can't take my life from the moment I was conceived by God, you also can't take my time away against my choice. You can't take my money from me. You can't pay to then take other people's lives with my money, right? So these people are arguing in an area that is commonly run, but they're also creating the tragedy of the commons, and they're arguing because they're within the tragedy of the commons of U.S. policy with the Middle East. Some people wanted to go one way, some people wanted to go the other way. Well, it just so happens that the people who think that the Palestinians are the instigators of all the violence and all the terrible stuff, and that Israel is perfectly fine to go in there and invade, they don't seem to look past October 7th. They don't seem to understand that Hamas was propped up by Benjamin Netanyahu, by the United States government. They don't seem to look at the history of things. And that young man, while he stood there and talked about how, they're keeping us off our property. That's your property, he's telling that girl. You have a right to that. Well, don't forget, just a couple months ago, I played a few times video of a Palestinian man who can't even go to visit his son-in-law because the man he has a staircase that's right next to a checkpoint that the Israelis have, and he can't go beyond a certain zone. It's right next to the staircase to his own house. And yet these people are arguing, and they don't recognize the problem of the state deciding where people can go and where they can't go. The state running some system. Let's look at how this guy's anger of not being able to be let into the green at Columbia doesn't seem to ring with as much power when you see what's been done to the Palestinian people who can't even go visit their son-in-laws because they're blocked by the state of Israel. This is a fact. This is true. And here's some history about the state of Israel in Gaza. This is from Turkish TV. Oh, I want to make sure I've got the right one, by the way. Yeah, I think I've got it. Okay, here we go. 6 months ago. Here we go.
Palestine's Gaza is a small strip of land home to 2 million Palestinians, but it is essentially an open-air prison and the world's largest concentration camp. To understand how it all started, we need to go back. In 1947, the UN proposed a creation of 2 independent states out of the historic Palestine, with Jerusalem under the international regime.
The United States government is willing to participate in a United Nations program to assist the parties involved in the establishment of a workable political settlement in Palestine.
Leading up to the 1948 war between Israel and the Arab states, as a result, majority of Palestinians were ethnically cleansed from their historical homeland by the Israeli occupational forces. Some of them made their way into this tiny enclave of Gaza. Today, 70% of people currently living in Gaza belong to those refugee families. Israel maintains direct control over Gaza's air and maritime spaces and over its mainland border, limiting everything and everyone that passes through it. Effectively cutting off and isolating Gaza's population from Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and isolating it from the rest of the world. The blockade has caused a perpetual humanitarian crisis for the Palestinians in Gaza. Without being able to develop industries due to the blockade, unemployment levels in Gaza are among the highest in the world, with 62% of Gaza's youth currently jobless. 1.3 million of 2 million Gazans require food assistance. Since Israel's blockade prevents Gazans from constructing pipelines, 78% of the pipe water in Gaza is unfit for human consumption. Israel's continued blockade and indiscriminate military assaults have targeted Gaza's ambulances and hospitals. Israel has launched 4 long and indiscriminate military assaults on Gaza in 2008, 2012, 2014, and 2021, destroying much of its health infrastructure, killing thousands of Palestinians, including scores of children. On the 17th of October, 2023, the Al Ali Baptist Hospital was targeted by an Israeli airstrike, killing at least 500 people.
New ideas were discussed.
American?
Yes.
And I am Palestinian. You have your state, and I have the right to have my flag and my state.
Well, Gaza is under a complete siege. There is zero inflow of food, water, fuel, and electricity. The strip has plunged into darkness for the 3rd night. Let's take a look at the region a little more closely now. Well, Gaza is a small strip of land with just 365 square kilometers area. 2.3 million Palestinians are cramped in here and have been living under a blockade since 2007, which means that Israel has been controlling who and what enters the region. And today they are blocked entirely.
So when we see that student at Columbia University upset that he can't get into a place that is deemed by the government as a public place, and he's blocked, but he supports Israel, seems to me that, maybe I could have a conversation with him and I could understand his position a little better and I could see that I'm wrong. I don't think I'm wrong. I think he doesn't get it. I think that he doesn't seem to understand how deep this problem is. And it's unfortunate that everybody has to argue and they all have to have a position on it. And there is a moral imperative to try to have a position on it, to try to steer this giant government of the United States, which already is acting contrary to the Constitution that all those politicians say is so great, right? And I know, that footage there is just stunning. It's really sad. And it's real. I went through, and I mentioned this past couple nights on the show, I went through that 2018 article about the problem of the water all the way back in 2018, right? And they go through 2012, 2015, other instances of after Hamas was brought in and supported by Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party and others in Israel to be the supposed political leaders of Palestine. Starting in 2005, 2006, subsequent times, repeated attacks by the Israelis, 500 people killed in a hospital. Why? Because Netanyahu knows that Hamas won't negotiate. And by initiating these things and kidnapping people and keeping them there, taking them out of Palestine, out of Gaza, he knows that will upset even more people. 13, 14-year-old kids and women. We saw Max Blumenthal talking about a friend of his who's being held. He's a reporter, held by the Israelis. Extrajudicial, no due process in any way whatsoever. But for some reason, the United States government doesn't call that kidnapping. The hypocrisy is stunning. I mean, it's blinding. It's like looking at the eclipse without any glasses on. You're going to damage your retinas if you look too long, right? But it's there. It's very clear. We know, as they say, right? Rich man north of Richmond, we know. We know very, very well. But let's talk about this one. From antiwar.com. Remember, they've got their fundraiser going on. Dave DeCamp wrote this yesterday. Israel tells the United States it will target, get this, the Palestinian Authority if ICC issues warrants. We're not talking Gaza. No. And I don't know why they call it the West Bank when it's on the east side. But let's continue. Israel has told the U.S. that if the International Criminal Court issues arrest warrants for senior Israeli officials, it would take strong action against the Palestinian Authority that could lead to its collapse, Axios reported on Wednesday. Israel has claimed that it has information that suggests, of course, they're making a claim, but they're not going to provide any evidence, that the Palestinian Authority is encouraging the ICC to issue the arrest warrants that are expected to target Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi. Now, Yoav Gallant and Benjamin Netanyahu, I know both have stated, have made statements that are clearly genocidal statements, and they've engaged in acts that follow up those genocidal statements with exactly what they're looking for, to wipe those people away from there. Now, again, I shouldn't have to have an opinion about this beyond some distanced moral observation, right? Some ethical observation on it. And yet the imperative is there because my money's being taken to blow apart kids, right? And of course, my money's being taken. How about that? So a senior Israeli official told Axios that if the warrants are issued, the Israeli cabinet would likely approve action that could collapse the Palestinian Authority. In other words, wage war against the Palestinian Authority. Israel could freeze the transfer of tax revenue that it collects for the Palestinian Authority, which would bankrupt the authority. The U.S. is opposing the ICC warrants and has said the court lacks jurisdiction. Russia has called out the U.S. for hypocrisy over the issue since it backed the ICC's warrant against Russian President Vladimir Putin. Neither Israel nor Russia are parties to the ICC. So yes, let's go into a little bit of history about the ICC, just to mention that to you. Now, they have that mentioned in Dave DeCamp's piece. Here's some background about the ICC from Human Rights Watch. Question and answers, the International Criminal Court and the United States. This Q&A addresses key questions regarding the ICC and the relationship between the court and the United States. Is the U.S. a member of the ICC? The U.S. is not a state party to the Rome Statute. The U.S. participated in the negotiations that led to the creation of the court. However, in 1998, the U.S. was one of only 7 countries, along with China, Iraq, Israel, Libya, Qatar, and Yemen, that voted against the Rome Statute. U.S. President Bill Clinton signed the Rome Statute in 2000, but did not submit the treaty to the Senate for ratification. Anybody remember that? I remember that. Oh, that was another perfect example of the character of Bill Clinton. Signing it, but then not submitting it to the Senate. Because, of course, he didn't want it to be ratified as a treaty. He wanted to look like he supported it, but then keep the United States off the hook because the United States already, before Bill Clinton, had been engaging in war crimes, and he was engaging in war crimes at the time. That was 1998. Anybody remember what he was doing in 1998? Yes, he was bombing Yugoslavia. We just had the story on it. 25th anniversary this week. So, of course, he's not going to sign up for it because then he could have been tried for war crimes. Yeah, let me just sign my own warrant here. I mean, it all ties together, right? Now, there's some more. Here is this. Legal experts debunk Israel, U.S. claims challenging ICC jurisdiction. Yes, there's even more. Check this out. This is quite interesting because it doesn't hinge on the United States and Israel. It hinges on something else, according to these experts from AA.com. Middle East. Legal experts debunk Israeli and U.S. claims challenging ICC jurisdiction. International law experts say that the ICC has the jurisdiction to act against Israeli officials because, hold on a second, what's going on? Well, that was interesting. Just got to check something out here, everybody. Hmm. Wow. I don't know. I think we lost the stream. Bummer. Oh. I wonder if we can get back. I don't know if I'm still streaming or not, everybody. I just don't know. It doesn't look like it. Yeah, I don't think so. Well, we will see. We will see. It looks like I'm still connected. But the power, what happened to the power? Let's try this again. Let's see if we can get this going here. It looks like we're coming back. Wow. It looks like we're coming back, everybody. Are we back? We had a power fluctuation there. Did anybody see that? I think we've been out for a bit here. Wow, that's really weird. Okay, thank you. I see inside Rokfin, people are saying, I can hear you now. Okay, now you are. We can hear you now. You are streaming, but some strange background static. Isn't that weird? And how about on Rumble? Yeah, I see I'm back. I can see myself. Okay. Thank you. And yes, Mr. Bicycle, I did not get the jab. Praise God. Absolutely. Yes, thank you, Mr. Bicycle, and everybody. That was really weird. We had a power fluctuation there, and all of a sudden everything just went black. But I could still see that I was connected on one computer with my battery. And it was like, wait, are we going or are we not? So yeah. All right. Well, I guess what'll happen is I'll put out the audio pod tonight and I'll like cut that section out for audio listeners or whatever. But I want to go back to where I think I was there. I don't know. Thank you, JVA. Thank you very much. JVA is over in X. Yeah, it's been a crazy week. I hope I don't have another week like this. This has been absolutely. I hope you don't have another week like this. We get together and want to get these news stories and share this information with everybody. And we're just starting to grow. Actually, we've grown in like little chunks here and there, big jumps. And then we sort of smooth out and then we go big chunks. But let me get back into things for you. So this is where I think I left off. And I can't even believe that I'm still going here. This is cool. Okay. So this is where we left off, just to lay it out here again, because I want to get this information out. And I think this is important. And again, there are so many stories. You get so many things they can just pass by quickly. But if somebody can feel the hook on this one and say, I got that information, I learned that information, I'll be pretty happy that I've been able to share this. So let me give it to you. I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to get by the side of it here and say hi. Welcome back. All right. So according to this report, the ICC does have jurisdiction, according to these legal experts, because Palestine is a state party, because it's recognized by so many other nation states as a state. Now, I don't know whether one thinks that these experts are all the vast majority of experts or whatever, as they would always say, trust the science, trust these legal authorities. But the argument is, I think, very interesting. International law experts, and of course, they're always the vaunted experts and so on, but they do get into some details here, say that the ICC has the jurisdiction to act against Israeli officials because Palestine is a state party. Quote, there is not much that Israel can do to challenge ICC jurisdiction over alleged crimes committed in Palestine, says criminal law professor Gerhard Kemp. No doubt, various states are effectively threatening the ICC with certain consequences, says International Criminal Court expert Mark Kirsten. ICC has often released some of its most important and most significant decisions at around 4 p.m. Hague time on a Friday, says Kirsten. Well, for some days now, they write out of Istanbul, there is a growing speculation that the ICC is poised to issue arrest warrants against top Israeli officials for the ongoing war in Gaza. Most of the hype has been fueled by Israel itself. First, with regular reports by Israeli news outlets about increasing apprehension among the top brass, followed by direct statements from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu attacking the ICC and urging his Western allies to pressure the court. Some people thought that was like a feint that he was doing, that he didn't actually think they were going to, and that he was going to look all strong as if they backed down. I don't know. That sort of gamesmanship is way beyond me. I'm not interested. Another tactic employed by Israel and its supporters, particularly the U.S., has been to question the ICC's power and jurisdiction to act against Israeli officials. Legal scholars have refuted these assertions, stressing that Israel not recognizing the ICC is not being a signatory to the Rome Statute, or not being a signatory to the Rome Statute, does not have any impact on the court's powers. The ICC has been leading an investigation since 2021 into potential war crimes committed by Israel and Palestinian groups dating back to 2014. The probe has grown to include ongoing attacks in the war in Gaza. Quote, Palestine is a state party to the ICC, and the ICC has accepted that it has jurisdiction over crimes committed in Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem, Gerhard Kemp, a professor of criminal law at the University of the West of England, Bristol Law School, told Anadolu. The ICC also has jurisdiction over crimes committed by Palestinian nationals outside the territory of Palestine. For example, in Israel on October 7th, 2023, he said, the short answer is that there is not much that Israel can do to challenge the ICC jurisdiction over the alleged crimes committed in Palestine, he explained. And that's why I said, if Benjamin Netanyahu wins re-election, I think he's going to fly to the United States. And if he doesn't he'll fly sometime eventually towards the end of that session. But if he doesn't, before he gets arrested either inside Israel or anywhere, he can't go anywhere else. So go to the United States, the other country that's not signatory to the ICC. That's the way they're going to do it, I think. So I wanted to give you that info. And I also want to do something else that hopefully you'll find interesting and valuable. So I want to turn now to some background information about why Gaza is known as the world's biggest open-air prison, and close off this information just a little bit here about Israel-Gaza. The Palestinian, this came out in 2023, October 12th, 2023. The Palestinian enclave in Gaza has been under an air, land, and sea blockade since 2007, when Hamas came to power. What has led to the dire conditions in Gaza, and what has been the impact on its residents, they ask. Well, after Hamas militants on Saturday, October 7th, launched the biggest assault on Israel in decades, the country's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, who would be up on ICC charges possibly, ordered a complete siege of the Gaza Strip. There will be no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything is closed, he said. Well, that's obviously improper according to international rules. They're not signatory to the ICC, but they're always talking about the international order. Israel is able to impose such conditions on Gaza because the Palestinian enclave has been under an air, land, and sea blockade since 2007. All right. Oh, I forgot. This is one of those stupid. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'll have to. Let me go here. This will do it for me.
On October 7, 2023, Hamas, a Palestinian militant group, launched a major attack on Israel. This resulted in the reported deaths of at least 900 Israelis. In response, Israel's military conducted airstrikes in Gaza, causing the deaths of over 700 Palestinians. In this video, we are going to briefly look at the 100-year-old conflict between Israel and Palestine from the beginning until 2023. Palestine, which was under Ottoman Empire rule in the early 1900s, came under the British control after the British defeated the Ottoman Empire in World War I. Back then, Palestine was a land with a Jewish minority and an Arab majority. After World War I, Jews started migrating from Europe to Palestine since the British had the task of establishing a Jewish state there. Jews claimed Palestine as their ancestral home, but Palestinian Arabs claimed the land and opposed the move. After World War II, tensions between Jews and Palestinian Arabs as well as the British grew after more Jews arrived in Palestine seeking a homeland after the Holocaust. In 1947, the British handed over the conflict to the UN. Therefore, the UN devised a plan to separate the land into a separate Arab and Jewish state. Jews agreed to this plan, but Palestinian Arabs opposed it. In 1948, the leaders of the Jews declared the creation of the State of Israel. Since Palestinian Arabs opposed it, a war was fought between Palestinians and neighboring Arab countries on one side and Israelis, the Jews, on the other side.
Now, why would the Palestinians oppose that? Because they had already had their land taken, and the agreement said it would forever be taken. That's why they opposed it. Duh.
Israelis won the war and hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were forced out of their homes in what they call Al-Nakba, or the catastrophe. Jordan occupied land which became known as the West Bank, and Egypt occupied Gaza. Jerusalem was divided between Israeli forces in the west and Jordanian forces in the east. After 18 years and another war in 1967, Israel won again and occupied East Jerusalem, the West Bank, Gaza, and the Egyptian Sinai Peninsula. Then the UN intervened, and as a result, Israel still occupies the West Bank, although it pulled out of Gaza in 2005. So Israel claims the whole of Jerusalem as its capital, while the Palestinians claim East Jerusalem as the capital of the future Palestinian state. More than 6 lakh Jews now live in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Israeli settlements in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and along the border are held to be illegal under international law, but Israel refuses to acknowledge it. So, what's happening now? Presently, most of the West Bank is administered by Israel, though 42% of it is under varying degrees of autonomous rule by Fatah-run Palestinian Authority with Mahmoud Abbas as the president. The Gaza Strip is currently under the control of Hamas after they won the 2006 elections. Hamas is a militant group committed to the complete destruction of Israel, so the UK, US, and other powers have designated them as a terrorist group.
Okay,
Since then,
so we'll pause
Hamas
it there because, of course, Hamas changed that policy even as their leaders still hang out in Qatar. So I think that gives a pretty good overview, but it doesn't exactly tell everything because, of course, it doesn't explain how many people were displaced when Israel was placed there. And, of course, it seems to assume, blithely so, that somehow the British can just deal out that land after the collapse of the Turkish Empire. Probably not a good idea. Also not a good idea if we look at Ukraine and watch some background information of the United States information, the United States influence in Ukraine going back many years, but not even to the origins of it. But just as a quick reminder, over the past few years, going back under Obama. Well, maybe not under Obama. Let's check it out as we hear from Alexander Mercouris, Alex Cristofano, and Aaron Mate. This is about 2 minutes worth of very valuable information about Ukraine.
In my latest article for Real Clear Investigations, I report that John Brennan, the CIA chief, in mid-April 2014, right before Ukraine announces the ATO, the anti-terrorist operation against the Donbass, which starts the war in the Donbass. The day before, John Brennan goes to Kyiv. He has meetings with his counterparts. At the time, the Kremlin, Yanukovych say that, why is John Brennan there, and is he encouraging an assault on the Donbass? Brennan denies this, says we want dialogue. But what I report in my article is that according to a participant in that meeting with John Brennan, who I interviewed, Andrei Telachenko, who was serving as Ukrainian official at the time, Brennan did exactly what the Kremlin accused him of. He encouraged an assault on the Donbass and discussed how the U.S. could support it. Anyway, about a week later, the New York Times comes out with this article that's really worth actually rereading for anybody who wants to understand the role of the U.S. in Ukraine. It's by Peter Baker, he's a stenographer for the Biden-Obama team. He's still at the New York Times, top White House correspondent. It's basically a declaration of a new Cold War in Obama's name. It says that Obama has decided that he cannot have a constructive relationship with Vladimir Putin. There will be no more discussions with Vladimir Putin, and the only policy now will be to pressure Putin sufficiently and pressure Russia sufficiently so that Putin is overthrown. It's obvious that this comes from Victoria Nuland, because everything in the article tracks exactly with what Victoria Nuland was saying at the time. That basically, we can't have a constructive relationship with Putin. The only way is for Russian people to feel the pain of his policies, and then hopefully they'll make a smarter decision. And so amazingly, the article, it declares a Cold War in Obama's name, but then deep down, the Peter Baker sources complain that Obama is being tepid. He's not being confrontational enough with Putin. So which is it? Is Obama declaring a new Cold War with Putin and saying he won't talk to him, or is he tepid? And the answer is what the Peter Baker's White House sources were doing. We're basically saying no matter what Obama wants, we're not going to have a constructive relationship with Putin. We're going to have a Cold War with this guy, no matter what the elected president says. So you just have huge continuity with these people, and they don't care about democracy. They're just...
Okay, so now I want to sort of parse this because I was reporting on it at the time. I want to play the beginning of this for you because it's extremely important what Aaron Monti says when we look at the timing of things and remember who was in charge when Brennan went into Ukraine. Check this out. This is key.
In my latest article for Real Clear Investigations, I report that John Brennan, the CIA chief, in mid-April 2014, right before Ukraine announces the ATO, the anti-terrorist operation against the Donbass, which starts the war in the Donbass. The day before, John Brennan goes to Kyiv. He has meetings with his counterparts. At the time, the Kremlin, Yanukovych say that, why is John Brennan there, and is he encouraging an assault on the Donbass? Brennan denies this, says we want dialogue. But
okay, so Yanukovych at that time in April of 2014 was no longer in charge of Ukraine. That became Yatsenyuk. Yanukovych was the guy who had been reelected in the fall of 2013 and had made agreements with the Russians for continued energy imports and things like that. That's one of the reasons why they put Hunter Biden on the Burisma board. So in late 2013, they engage in some of the overthrow. You see the Maidan coup starting and then rolling into 2014 with a bunch of false flags that they tried to portray as being the result of Yanukovych. Yanukovych leaves office, and in that March through April period, Barack Obama sees this new government installed. Vladimir Putin moves troops into Crimea to protect Crimea against what? Against aggressive attacks against Russian people by pro-Nazi groups. And now we know that John Brennan helped that happen. So this entire thing was a setup to allow Barack Obama to declare an emergency. And you can see his executive order, March of 2014, claiming that the Russians were engaging in aggressive action. Now we know that John Brennan was involved in instigating the attacks on the innocent people. Once Yanukovych got into office, was involved in instigating those attacks, and Yatsenyuk was in office, and Yanukovych had fled and gone to Russia. Okay, so Yanukovych is elected in the fall. The Soros groups, the NATO, other organizations like the Atlantic Council, the United States government, and John Kerry, who was Secretary of State at the time, Victoria Nuland, Jeffrey Pyatt, they're all involved with certain forces in December into January to overthrow Yanukovych. They kill innocent people out in front of the Capitol building in Kiev. Then they blame it on Yanukovych. He didn't do it. Then they overthrow him. They work with Nazis like the Sloboda Party, and they have them as the backups to the new person they put in, Yatsenyuk. And that's where the phone call comes in, the F the EU phone call. At that time, we find out that during that March to April period, we find out that John Brennan went to Ukraine and met with the neo-Nazi groups to stir them up to go down and go down to the Donbass. And they not only went into the Donbass, they attacked Crimea, which then inspired Vladimir Putin to respond. And what happened? Barack Obama responds by saying Vladimir Putin is the aggressor. Amazing, amazing stuff. And I think hopefully I spelled that out well. You can let me know. Let me know your thoughts on that. If you thought I spelled it out, or just thoughts about the subject in general, because I think that was a valuable thing that Aaron Mate had to say there. And I think it exposes the deceptiveness of these people and the way that they manipulated the entire thing so that they could portray the Russians as the aggressors. And then they used that from that point on with the whole Russian interference, the Russian meddling, the Russian ties for Trump, and all these things that they kept promoting. And now they're doing the same thing again with Vladimir Putin. They tried to attach him to support of Hezbollah and attacks on Israel and all that other nonsense, right? And they're trying to do it with China as well. They're trying to say the Chinese are the bad guys. We've got the TikTok stuff and all this stuff. The Chinese are too closely allied with those evil warmongering Russians. Last I saw, it wasn't the Russians who overthrew the government of Ukraine in 2013. It wasn't Vladimir Putin's son who was on the board of Burisma. Now, as an anarchist, I can say I don't like the idea that the Russian government and the Ukrainian government are taking people's money to form corporate ties or anything like that. But I was warned in 2010, 2011 or so, that the United States was going to try to overthrow Syria. Why? Because they didn't want Russia and Syria to operate the pipeline that would go west from Russia and bring natural gas through Syria. Why? Because, of course, the United States didn't like the Russians disconnecting from the U.S. debt instruments, starting with the Obama administration and their American Recovery Act, because the Russians knew that the long-term bonds would be paid back with worthless money. But in addition to that, the Arab states didn't want the competition. And at that time, the United States was still hoping that they could keep the petrodollar rolling for a while longer. And of course, they always answered to the demands of the petro side that supports the dollar. So what do you think, all? I like this. Lieutenant Oracle of Truth says this: we have been infiltrated from within. I don't know if that was about the break in the show or not, but yeah. And Risha M, Inside Rokfin, thanks for being there. And also, I want to thank JVA. Thank you for being there, JVA. Really appreciate that. Now, over at YouTube, I want to check out what's going on in YouTube. Haven't had an opportunity to do so. And let's see. Thank you for watching, and thank you for spreading the word. Okay, now, let's see. We've got some interesting conversations. Oh, Sevens Heavenly says sound is back, still streaming on YouTube. Thank you, Seven Heavenly. I appreciate that. No sound since you went to check on something. Okay, thank you. And yeah, again, hopefully the team and I will be able to get things, double checked and everything for next week. One of them was a Rumble thing this week. Seems like there've been like 3, and so we'll see. But Sevens Heavenly says, abortion methods are not used in emergency situations, which is usually the case when a mother's life is in jeopardy and the viability of the child is factored in. That's a very good point. And that is a very good point. Yeah. So I think, clearly they're playing with words down there in Arizona, and I wouldn't expect anything less from that deceptive, deceitful governor-ess out there. Now, tonight, it's been an interesting night. I want to get into that fiction thing and just sort of pull away from stuff. And then I'll give you the last chunk. And again, it's been sort of an abbreviated show, so it's been kind of weird tonight. But, the best laid plans. But instead of reading fiction often, which is something I often do on Fridays, I want to turn to, I've got some books that one of them, it was a contract that I declined because they wanted me to change my name under my publishing name so that it wouldn't be associated with my political work. And it's their prerogative. I understand if they think it's going to harm sales or whatever, they can ask. That's okay. But I told them, no, thanks. I'm not going to take the contract. And that book has not been published. It's been 10 years now. But I want to give you this one from Elle Griffin. And she knows very well about the publishing world. And I think this is very interesting. It's about what actually has been revealed in a court case about the way the publishing world works and how bad things are for normal book publishing, especially for places like traditional booksellers, like, Random House, Simon & Schuster, and how small publishers, there are so many of them. One would think, okay, they have to vastly outnumber, and even in the grosses and the nets, they've got to outnumber the big ones. But when it comes to the publishing contracts, check out how screwed up this publishing world is. She writes, in 2022, Penguin Random House wanted to buy Simon & Schuster. The two publishing houses made up 37% and 11% of the market. According to the filing, of their filing to merge. Of course, they had to do this because the government demanded the information. So I want to put that up front there. That's an immoral demand by the government. It's a threat, obviously, because they won't allow them to merge unless they serve up internal documents contrary to the Fourth Amendment. Now, these are corporations, but there's nothing that allows the government to get these private documents in the first place. You got to have a warrant if you think there's a crime. Otherwise, forget it. And you're also not supposed to see the government. You shouldn't have to see the government issuing corporate status to anything. But somehow superhuman, right? Oh, I'm now a corporation. I'm impervious to lawsuits. You can only take the assets of the corporation and not me. But she writes, the government intervened and brought an antitrust case against Penguin when they wanted to buy Simon & Schuster. And they were worried, of course, that they would create a monopoly. The judge, and of course the monopoly is the government, the judge ultimately ruled that the merger would create a monopoly and block the $2.2 billion purchase. Now, we'll get into monopoly some other time, antitrust some other time. I've done it in the past, and I think it's valuable. You got to revisit these topics often because new stories come up, new people get interested in them. Teenagers start to hear about antitrust, say, "Okay, let's bring it back. Let's talk about it in class." So, but during the trial, the head of every major publishing house and literary agency got up on the stand to speak about the publishing industry and give numbers, giving us an eye-opening account of the industry from the inside. All of the transcripts from the trial were compiled into a book called The Trial. It took me a year to read, but I finally summarized my findings and pulled out all the compelling highlights. Again, if you want to find her, this is Elle Griffin, and this is her Substack. The Elysian, Elysian, the Elysian, two separate words. She writes this: I think I can sum up what I've learned like this. The big five publishing houses spend most of their money on book advances for big celebrities like Britney Spears and franchise authors like James Patterson, and this is the bulk of their business. They also sell a lot of Bibles, repeat bestsellers like Lord of the Rings, and children's books like The Very Hungry Caterpillar. These two market categories, celebrity books and repeat bestsellers from the backlist, make up the entirety of the publishing industry and even fund their vanity project, which is publishing all the rest of the books we think about when we think about book publishing of new books, which make no money at all and typically sell less than 1,000 copies. She says, let's dig into everything they said in detail. So I'll give you this in bigger size if you're watching on video. Bestsellers are rare, and she turns to the court testimony. In my essay, Writing Books Isn't a Good Idea, I wrote that in 2020, only 268 titles, 268, sold more than 100,000 copies. And 96% of books sold less than 1,000 copies. That's still the vibe. Question in the court: do you know approximately how many authors there are across the industry with 500,000 units or more during this 4-year period? Answer: my understanding is that it was about 50. 50 authors across the publishing industry who during this 4-year period sold more than 500,000 units in a single year? Yes. That is from the CEO of Penguin Random House, Madeline McIntosh. Writes the author here, the DOJ's lawyer collected data on 58,000 titles published in a year and discovered that 90% of them sold fewer than 2,000 copies and 50% sold less than a dozen copies. 50% sold less than a dozen copies. And 90% of the 58,000 titles published in a year sold fewer than 2,000. In my essay, she wrote, no one will read your book. I said that publishing houses work more like venture capitalists. They invest small sums in lots of books in hopes that one of them breaks out and becomes a unicorn, making enough money to fund all the rest. Turns out the publishing houses agree. Quote from Marcus Dole of Penguin Random House, CEO. Every year, in thousands of ideas and dreams, only a few make it to the top. So I call it the Silicon Valley of media. We are angel investors of our authors and their dreams, their stories. That's how I call my editors and publishers, angels. It's rather this idea of Silicon Valley. You see 35% are profitable, 50 on a contribution basis. So every book has that same likelihood of succeeding. She writes, those unicorns happen every 5 to 10 years or so. She says, big advances. They spent a lot of the trial talking about books that made an advance of more than $250,000. They call these anticipated top sellers. According to Nicholas Hill, a partner at Bates White Economic Consulting, 2% of all titles earn an advance over $250,000. Publishers Marketplace says that it's even lower. Top selling authors, writes Publishers Marketplace, Top-selling authors were defined as those receiving advances, i.e. guaranteed money, in excess of $250,000. Far fewer than 1% of authors receive advances over that mark. Publishers Marketplace, which tracks these things, recorded 233 such deals in all of 2022. Sorry, that was a publisher at Sutherland House talking about Publishers Marketplace. And she goes on. Hill says that titles that earn advances over $250,000 account for 70% of advanced spending by publishing houses. At Penguin Random House, it's even more. The bulk of their advanced spending goes to deals worth $1 million or more, and there are about 200 of those deals a year. Of the roughly $370 million they say PHR accounts for, $200 million of that goes to advanced deals worth $100 million or more. So 200 authors, $200 million. It's incredible. So as she says, she notes this. Here's the way that it breaks down. Penguin Random House US has guidelines for who gets what advance. Category 1, lead titles with a sales goal of 75,000 units and up, they get a $500,000 advance. And of course, a percentage of the gross. Category 2, titles with sales goal of 25,000 to 75,000 units, they get an advance of 150,000 to 500,000. Category 3, titles with a sales goal of just 2,000 and 25,000 units, 10,000 and 25,000 units, $50,000 to $150,000. So if you write a book and you want it published and they think that maybe you're in category 3, you'll get between $50,000 and $150,000 for that year's worth of work. It's typically, a 10-month thing to write a novel. Category 4, titles with a sales goal of 5,000 to 10,000 units, advance $50,000 or less. That's why many of my friends who are published say that when you walk into a bookstore, you are probably earning more than 85 to 90% of all the authors who are displayed on the shelves in the bookstore. So I just wanted to bring that up to you. And there is one thing that I forgot to do in the news side of this. So as a quick reminder, and I hope you don't mind the displacement here, I want to turn to what I showed last night with Savvy Savs and what Netanyahu had to say about
separate from the International Court of Justice, which is
about the International Court of Justice. All right, because she makes some excellent points. So here we go. And then I'll just go into real quick the tariff thing and sort of wrap things up, hopefully with that good chunk of scholarship. We'll see. Here we go.
Separate from the International Court of Justice, which is...
Pause for a second. So do you see what he's basically saying? So long story short, if they were to issue an arrest warrant for Netanyahu, then that means they see him the same as they see Vladimir Putin. Israel's reputation is already damaged, but that would damage their reputation even more. Right? But don't get it twisted, because I really don't think this is going to happen. And we'll get into the details as to why I think that in just a second. Again, we have to remember when it comes to Israel, they are often not held accountable. Now he's breaking down the difference between the ICC and the ICJ.
In Ukraine, we should say, Savannah, the International Criminal Court is separate from the International Court of Justice, which is right now hearing a case on whether or not Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, an allegation Israel denies.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated.
Okay, so that is huge news coming through. And Netanyahu actually is also concerned about this, apparently. I want to actually go to that first. I want you to hear Netanyahu's response about the possibility of him being arrested. Now, again, remember, he is the one to play the victim. He likes to try to play the victim. Israel has never done anything wrong in his eyes. So just keep that in mind when you hear this statement from him. He's the guy that seems to think that he cannot be touched. Zachariah says, Bibi Netanyahu. Oh, you mean that Philly guy, Ben Melowaski? Zachary coming in with the punch.
You have to hear this to believe this. The International Criminal Court in The Hague is contemplating issuing arrest warrants against senior Israeli government and military officials as war criminals. This would be an outrage of historic proportions. International bodies like the ICC arose in the wake of the Holocaust committed against the Jewish people.
So we're not even 30 seconds in, and he's already mentioned the Holocaust. We're not even 30 seconds in. You see what happens here? Because according to Bibi, they are not allowed, The Hague, which is in the Netherlands, they are not allowed to hold Israel accountable. They're not even allowed, you can't even criticize Israel, according to Bibi.
They were set up to prevent such horrors, to prevent future genocides. Yet now, the International Court is trying to put Israel in the dock. It's trying to put us in the dock as we defend ourselves against genocidal terrorists and regimes, Iran, of course, that openly works to destroy the one and only Jewish state.
When did Iran and Hamas commit a genocide against Israelis? You see, this goes back to this statement of defending oneself, because the thing is, Israel and the U.S. government and the Western allies as well, they have made it very clear that the only country in that region that has a right to defend itself apparently is Israel. No one else does. So if you are captured and you've been in prison, you have family members that have been imprisoned by the IDF, children, people tortured, beaten, occupied, oppressed, you're not allowed to defend yourself. Let that sink in for a second, guys. Let me just let that sink in. If you are imprisoned, remember, it's not like when they arrest the Palestinians, it's not like they go to court. They just grab people up off the street. They'll pull Palestinians out of a home, even if it's not the person they came there for. They'll take someone else and arrest them. So it's not like they have like this court of justice that they appear in and they're rightfully tried. But if you are occupied and you are oppressed and you are beaten and they put you on a caloric diet and all this kind of things, you are not allowed to defend yourself. How is that any different from the same ideology that people had in this country, that plantation owners had in this country? Again.
Absolutely. Absolutely right. And she did such a great job there. I'm so glad that I was able to see it live, and I was just very impressed by that. So I wanted to make sure that I did bring that up. And again, I was going to pause it at a couple times when he brought up the Holocaust, and the guy seems to imply that there's some great value to the ICC, that it was brought up in response to the things that were done to Jewish people in World War II. And yet he doesn't mention that his own nation state hasn't signed up to the ICC. So his hypocrisy is right there as he's speaking. It's dripping off him. It's just incredible. It's just like, dude, literally you're saying this from the nation state that you're saying is comprised of people that came from Europe after the Holocaust, and you're saying you didn't sign on with the thing you said is so important after the Holocaust. It's like, oh man, dude, seriously, that's nuts, right? The other thing about it is that Savvy Savs makes great points, and her channel is awesome on YouTube. I only started watching her over the past couple of weeks. I'd seen little segments of it, and I think Richard Grove has played her before, and I said, oh, I like her, and I never really got around to it. And I'm so glad that I did. And she's down in Boston. I'm going to try to reach her some way if I can and see if I can make it down to Boston. Like I said, maybe meet up with her and her husband or something like that. And, sit down and grab some ice cream, do an interview or something. That'd be great. That'd be great. I love it. But it's really quite something to see. And so I just wanted to make sure that I got that out there for you. And I also mentioned to Dave DeCamp that I told that story about to Dave DeCamp. I just typed it out to Dave about my experience in Boston University, with that last name and so on and so forth. You know what I'm talking about, and the way that the Zionists acted even then, the way that they would talk about the Palestinians. So I wanted to make sure I got that on record for him. He probably already knows that, but I wanted to get it out there. I think it was Dave. It might have been Max Blumenthal, but I think it was Dave DeCamp I wrote to Dave about it. So I want to turn now to a final portion. The portion I was looking for last night on the show, everybody, and you were so great. You were so patient. I'm going to turn a little bit more and put that chunk together for tariffs. Again, sort of abbreviated from last night, sort of an addendum, an appendix, you might say. But before I do it, I just want to say thanks to everybody for having a great night. And, these are some difficult issues. And I can express my thoughts to you is it's really like a breath of fresh air when I come here and I see your comments, or I'm watching David Knight. I got to see Tony today and join Tony on his chats. And, it's done by the internet. And yet you're sort of like, oh, I can't wait if I could just drive out and see that person. So I just want to tell everybody that how much I appreciate it. And I hope that you have a good time. Sometimes it's super serious and so on. I'm going to open up the lines in just a minute. And if you want to come in, we'll spend about 15 minutes joining me in the chat. If you want to go on camera, if you want to just open up your mic, anything like that, let me know, what you're thinking about any of the stories, or, where you are, what your location is, so you can tell the other people. You can be general if you want to. Just say hi, that sort of stuff, and then we'll do more of that. I can't wait. You're going to see some great things coming up. I've been jotting some ideas down. And Karen Carpenter, thank you. And Taylor Saunders, thank you. Both of you. Wow, nice. Wow, thank you. So if you're not over at Rokfin, Taylor Saunders contributed $20 at Rokfin. He says, thank you for all you present, Gard. I always look forward to your show. With all the news that seems so heavy, you always manage to bring in humor and throw some fun and sarcasm into the mix. That's awesome. That's awesome. Keep rolling, Gard. Cheers, Taylor. Yes. And Taylor, when I watch Planet of the Apes again, I'll be thinking of you, buddy. Thank you. Thank you so much. I wish I were there. Pat you on the shoulder, say thank you so much. You're all great. And Karen Carpenter, fantastic. She gave a tip of $10 as well. So great. Risha M is there. So good. I appreciate it. And Chris, yep, I'm going to throw the StreamYard link in. So I'd love for Chris Graves to join us. I call Priestess is over there in Rumble, and I'm going to throw it down there in Rumble as well. So let me do that in just a minute. But first, I'm going to share with you some of this information about tariffs, and also misapprehension that in economics class, it's, you can sort of work through it pretty easily because people can ask questions. They can say, yeah, but what about this? You sort of explain it to people in a pretty cogent way, and it leaves people looking pretty positively on these things. And saying, oh, yeah, okay, okay, that's cool. And again, from the anarchist standpoint, even if I thought it was going to be productive to do one thing or another, the act of forcing somebody or threatening somebody that they have to act this way, you just can't do that. So tariffs are immoral, regardless of someone's so-called justification. They're immoral. This was actually something I looked at last night when I was trying to find this, and it was under a title that I didn't realize. It's actually part of my immigration argument, but I shifted it inside my book in Live Free or Die. So here's Live Free or Die. It's on page 73. It's one of the addendums to immigration because it's sort of one of the branches off of this. And it's an open letter to a radio talk show host in New Hampshire that I wrote in 1999. So I'm talking about so-called, I get into tariffs, but I get into it by way of allowing certain immigrants to come in or something like that. So I said, sir, Mr. Radio Host, I listened with interest to your discussion regarding Pat Buchanan's views on international trade, and I see a few flaws in the argument. First, as you know, numerous studies have shown that any attempt to protect a particular industry from foreign competition harms consumers to the tune, and I went back into what James Bovard has in his book from all the studies he looked at, of 8 times over the benefits provided to that particular industry. So 8 times the harm delivered to consumers in the aggregate. James Bovard has written extensively about this, as has Murray Rothbard and people like Walter Williams. And there have been many studies by the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, the Congressional Budget Office, and General Accounting Office that bear this out. But Pat's protectionist argument, and I like Pat Buchanan, he's a really, really nice guy. Pat's protectionist argument usually disregards this point in favor of other issues he sees as more important. Many of your points Friday paralleled this. First, you mentioned that you don't need a college education to work at low-wage service jobs, such as those provided by Walmart and McDonald's. Of course, one doesn't need a college degree to start a small business, but one does need to be able to get low-interest loans. And this is based on consumer savings, which is in turn based on the ability of consumers to buy less expensive products made by companies that can be more and more productive. Now, I want to pause here because one of the things that they talk about is the United States switching over from a production-based to a service-based, from a manufacturing-based to a service-based economy, right? One of the things that I think often gets missed in the back and forth rhetoric, and a lot of times it gets really heated, you know, when people are talking about jobs, unions get involved, it gets really intense, right? And people have a lot of patriotic notions. Oh, you're selling American jobs out, and this is for national security and things. There's a lot mixed in, right? So if you can open those things up and you can put them on a board, you can sort of go through these things, and it's a little bit more comfortable when you go through them. And, you know, sometimes people will get upset, but a lot of times they'll just sort of hold on to what they want to say, and then they'll present it later. And you can have sometimes a little bit less stressful conversation about it, right? But one of the things that I like to bring up to people, and I haven't really done it very much on the show, I often mention that the final employer is the consumer, right? And this is a pretty important point to bring up. And Benjamin Powell brought this up as well in the piece that we read last night. And there are other pieces about this as well. And so one of the things that I do think that gets missed is when we talk about productivity, I think a lot of people think, okay, producing more goods for less money, right? And as I mentioned in the video for MRC TV, generally speaking, people show that they want to be able to get more for their efforts, not less. That's why when you're working with a tool and it breaks, you get frustrated, like, oh man, shoot. And if it breaks again, you go crazy, you know, like, why can't I get a handle of this thing? Come on, geez, I just want to get this done, right? So you get reliable tools, you get things that reduce your toil and help you improve your lives, give you more time to then address other parts of your life, areas where you could donate to people for charity or invest in a new business, right? You might fail. Other people will see that. That's a great example in the marketplace, which incorporates failure into its machinery of operation, right? It needs to recognize failure so other people can avoid that, right? So that's what the market is. It's an ongoing process, right? It's just a system. It's trial and error, and people observe other people's trials and errors and successes. It's great. It's peace, right? But one of the things that I don't think I've ever really said it on the show is when we're talking about greater productivity, I think a lot of people don't recognize, they look at the products, right? Or they look at the number of times a person can conduct a particular service, like, you know, landscaping or, you know, lifting rocks or doing whatever, accounting for somebody or whatever the service is, right? They look at that as, well, if you can do this many more, you're more productive for less money. That's good. And you can charge people less and increase in volume. And that's awesome. You're helping everybody. It helps everybody get something for less, which is exactly what the competitive market inspires, right? But one of the things that people overlook is that consumers are also producers. What do they produce? They produce savings. Consumers, through their own interest, produce savings, which are then tangible items in many ways of money. They turn into liquidity. Those are real goods. So in order to be more productive in all ways, we want to make sure the consumer can be more productive. Producing what? Producing profit for himself as he decides it, whether it's in time to be able to do something else with his family, or it's in monetary measures, whatever it might be. Oftentimes it is monetary measures, and that gets reinvested in new businesses. But I think a lot of people, just like they don't consider that the consumer is also the final employer, and that if people are going to excoriate employers for so-called exploiting people, well, then they're going to have to damn the consumer, because the consumer is trying to get the best buy for his buck as well. And therefore, he's taking advantage of the exploited so-called employer and the employer's employee, right? Oh, that was darn consumers who are the final employers, right? You're damning them as well. So leave them alone, right? Let people be free to make their choices and join people, right? Now, again, I say that with the consideration that United States businesses are put upon. Some of them can play the favorites game in Washington. They can rent seek. They can get policies to block competition, which is another reason why you don't want tariffs, right? But in addition to that, one of the big deals that is so key is, when consumers are confronted with these problems, they're presented with a lot of misapprehensions. So I want to go into a couple more of these things here. Again, the consumer as producer, producing a surplus with his own money that can be reinvested, right? Okay. So I said the dynamic that drives startup small businesses is based on the productivity of the economy, which frees up lower cost money for entrepreneurs who, in turn, can hire more people. And that's done apart from the central banking system that creates fake money. Rather than seeing more money available through productivity gains and consumers producing more money available because they've saved it, the government and the Fed just pump it out there, and they artificially give it to people who are first in line. They profit first because the prices haven't been bid up. And then all of us at the end of the train in the caboose are getting all the fumes. Everything's been spiked up. I said, the idea that people are stuck in certain positions, that they just don't have the education or ability to move up in the job market, smacks of a lack of confidence in human nature and runs counter to historic example. From Irish and Italian immigrants to Cuban refugees and African Americans who were enjoying better lifestyles before the imposition of the Great Society, immigrants and minorities were often uneducated, yet able to learn skills and raise their own living standards and those for their progeny. I'm sure you've read the incredibly detailed studies by Tom Sowell about immigrants. And he was basically saying, well, they're just going to work minimum wage jobs at restaurants and so on and so forth. Well, they gain skills. And what's wrong with them working minimum wage jobs? As I said, so-called fair traders, and this is where we started to get into tariffs, argue two other points. One, the big business is manipulating government to allow it to bring in cheaper products, then moving plants to other countries to employ cheaper labor, thus destroying productive jobs in the U.S. Two facets to consider here are the fact that it is in the best interest of the consumer to be able to purchase the least expensive, high-quality product, which, again, is the spark for freeing up money for new businesses. Also, to try to block certain specific products is akin to Frederick Bastier's ironic example of the candle makers lobbying for the extinguishing of their competition, the sun. The paradox presented in protecting certain sectors deemed important by those in power in the government is very obvious. But Pat Buchanan believes that lobbyists are getting government to play favorites for big businesses that want to use cheaper foreign labor. In other words, importing goods made by foreigners. His answer? To use government to protect certain industries. I said they will be big too, with lobbyists and unions funneling money for political favors. And they will be certain industries in this country that will be protected from foreign competition, from less expensive products that American consumers could buy for less, thus using their money most productively, thus stopping them from using their money most productively. If people want protection, they have the power of their own wallets and free choice to buy or not to buy. And I said, his logic in economic terms is circular. The second point that Pat Buchanan argues is on strategic grounds. He believes that if we don't protect certain essential sectors of the economy, as he describes them, steel, for example, they will atrophy, and we may be in danger should we get into a military conflict. This is his best attempt to rationalize playing favorites with blue-collar workers whom certain demagogues say don't have the capacity to get training for new jobs. Additionally, the idea of choosing which industries are essential is unfeasible. Steel is often quoted as essential for defense, but if we can buy cheaper steel from Japan and build weapons, tanks, carriers, etc. more productively, that assists our military preparedness. Of course, some will say that if we won't sell it, if they won't sell it, then there are two scenarios. They will say, what if they won't sell it? So in other words, you're harming your ability to be prepared now if you're imposing tariffs. But the flip side of that is, well, we've got to impose tariffs because our future might be at stake if we let those businesses atrophy. So you're going to lose either way, right? You won't be as prepared now because you can't build your military as cheaply because you're unwilling to get the foreign products for less. That's dumb. You're shooting yourself in the foot. The other one is, well, the other countries might gain advantage and then shut us off. So here we go. I concentrate more on the second one here. I said there are two scenarios here. That what if they won't sell it? First, if they won't sell it, first they would sell to us, but cut it off. If this is the case, we would have already been able to build a stronger military at less cost, thus heightening our preparedness and decreasing the probability that we would be attacked. Second, they would just not sell to us at all, which would mean that we'd be producing it anyway. And I said, and what constitutes strategic industries anyway? Is farming an essential strategic industry? Then we shouldn't buy cheaper foreign food for fear that our farming sector will atrophy. Is high technology? Then, in all seriousness, we would want to allow technology-based businesses to operate more productively and compete to produce better products. And we know how that's done. By allowing competition and by allowing those businesses to buy the best products they need at lowest prices, including services. Is steel essential? Is plastic? Are textiles? All are essential during wartime, and all could be fodder for protectionists. Who decides? Pat Buchanan? In his zeal to stop businesses from getting favors from government regarding tariffs, he wants to play favorites regarding tariffs. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, if we fear the atrophy of certain sectors, then we have to protect them all, getting worse products at higher costs, harming productivity, and suppressing job growth. And it is this very movable capital that allows for more immediate response to military threat. The idea that we must protect certain strategic industries reaches an infinite regress, both with regard to technology. Steel production depends in turn on other products, the makers of which buy from foreign nations because they're cheaper and thus allow those steel companies to be more productive, and regarding interest groups and labor interests. Pat's utopian, non-economic view is utterly wrong and unworkable. It takes more time to reactivate an atrophied agricultural sector than it takes to open up mines in the U.S. and start up steel production. The best thing we can do to help those strategic preparedness is to open up mineral resources in U.S. companies and lift all of the burdens on the companies. So anyway, I just said that. And I want to turn to one other thing, and then we'll open up the lines and chat with you guys. But one of the things that often comes up, and I've mentioned this before in the show, and I try to dispel this notion for a lot of the students too, because again, it leaves you with a nice, comfortable feeling afterwards, and you say like, "Oh wow, I didn't know that." So this book was edited by David Henderson, who's a friend of mine. He's an economist, and it's the Fortune Encyclopedia of Economics. Now, if you go into the Fortune Encyclopedia of Economics, you'll see, I've got to find it. I think it's on page like 418, if I recall. I don't even remember now, but I'll find it. You'll see 511, the balance of payments. So this is by Herb Stein, who was also an economist. So you often hear people, and they'll be talking about it now, Donald Trump. And in fact, I want to bring up a little bit more to just go through the idea that Donald Trump's tariffs worked. I'll show you that little bit. I didn't get to add to that. You often hear that, oh, there's this terrible trade deficit. And now I brought this up before, so if you're familiar with the show, pardon me for doing it again. But what the trade deficit is only half the picture. Because trade, by definition, the word trade means an exchange. It means money for goods, money for services. So some person is giving something up because he values that other thing more than the money he's got, and the other person is giving up the thing or the service because he values the money more than the service. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it, right? They wouldn't engage in that. So they both are advantageous. They're both to their advantage. Now, when a trade occurs, and when people say that there is a trade deficit, what that means is that the foreign country they're targeting, whatever country it is, didn't buy as many of the things that are produced over here as people over here bought of the things that are produced over there. So if I give money to somebody who also doesn't buy something from me but gives me something, technically he's buying my money with his thing, whatever he's selling, right? Or his service. So we're both buying something from each other, right? It's just a different thing that we value. I give up these little things, or I give up these digits to you, and you give up that physical thing or these services, right? So it's a trade of whatever, right? It's like trading baseball cards. I give you the Bill Lee, you give me the Carl Yastrzemski, all right? Whatever, right? So the trade means that the trade imbalance that they say, the trade deficit is, oh, they didn't buy as many of our things that the government recognizes as we gave them money to buy their things, right? But again, it's a trade. Now, but why do they say that there's a deficit? Because the source of the problem for them that they don't tell you is that the dollar is stronger most of the time. You'll see a trade deficit when the dollar rises in value and power, buying power compared to the other currencies. They'll say that there is a trade deficit. All it means is that the dollar was able to buy more of certain things. So, and this is generally the case. Now, you might have some instances where productivity gains in other countries allowed us to buy more over there from some company, but generally it's because of monetary situations, right? It's because of the value of the petrodollar or the Federal Reserve note, which of course is decreasing rapidly. Now, you've also got other burdens of prices for U.S. products that go up because of burdens that are put on them, like things that harm their productivity, like regulations and taxes, and pressures on the prices of things that they use, imported energy, imported goods, because they want to put tariffs on them, whatever. It becomes a vicious cycle. So what you find is, for example, if you're going to go on a vacation to England, and it turns out that the dollar jumps in value comparable to the pound, usually the pound is worth a little bit more than the dollar, then you end up finding that, let's say the dollar increases, that's a good time to go. You can buy more with your dollar. You'll get more pounds if you exchange them on this Saturday rather than if you exchange them last month, because the exchange rate for the dollar was lower, okay? So the buying power of the dollar has gone up a little bit comparable to the other things. That means you're going to be able to buy more British knickknacks. Well, you've got a trade deficit right there. Shouldn't have done that, right? So that's where the trade deficit comes from. That's the terminology from it. It's not actually real. Why? Because it's a trade. It's an exchange. By definition, there's no deficit. If you're trading with somebody, you've made it because it's a fair trade. You don't have a deficit, okay? And this is why the term balance of payments is constantly avoided by the nativists, by the people who want to gin up fear over the fact that the United States dollar might have bought more Chinese goods, because they want to demonize the Chinese. Now, there's a difference between buying products on the open market and seeing that the dollar is relatively stronger than all the other crappy things that are out there. And some of them are becoming less crappy. But when we come to the United States so-called trade deficit, it's usually because the dollar is stronger than those other countries. When the dollar rises in purchasing power, it will purchase more of that stuff. And then you say, oh, you purchased more of those items than they purchased of our items. Well, that's because their stuff isn't as powerful to buy our stuff. We can buy more of their stuff, right? But the key in economics is that it's called the balance of payments. What happens to those dollars that go overseas? Do they just melt and morph into some yuan or yen or franc or pound? No, they don't. They remain dollars. And what happens to those dollars? They are in the hands of people now who have received them and want to do something with them. because they're still powerful compared, and I'm not saying the dollar is powerful in any way, but compared to other currencies, it might still be valuable, especially if its value has risen due to productivity gains in the United States. That means that those dollars are very worthwhile to invest in the United States because the United States economy is showing great increases and profits. Extra money left over due to productivity. The consumer, as producer, has produced profits that can be invested in things and new startup experiments. Now all those people overseas have those dollars and they can bring them back here. That's why it's liquidity. It's liquid. It can move. Now we'll go to the Fortune Encyclopedia of Economics. Herbert Stein writes about what it really is, always the balance of payments. There's never a deficit, there's always a balance, because what we send out in monetary units to buy the things or the services are then received by those people, and those dollars, the liquidity, comes back to the United States in the form, you got it, of investment in new businesses or businesses that want to expand or R&D. Why in the world would somebody want to stop that? This is why free market economics and peace run hand in hand. Herbert Stein writes, few subjects in economics have caused so much confusion and so much groundless fear in the past 400 years as the thought that a country might have a deficit in its balance of payments. Think about that. It's a balance of payments, but a deficit. Obviously, the context tells you that they don't go together. The words tell you this. This fear is groundless for two reasons. One, there never is a deficit. And two, it wouldn't necessarily hurt if there were. The balance of payments accounts of a country record the payments and receipts of the residents of the country in their transactions with residents of other countries. If all transactions are included, the payments and receipts of that country are and must be equal. Any apparent inequality simply leaves one country acquiring assets in the others, which means you've got value and that should be included in the total anyway. Any apparent inequality leaves one country acquiring assets in the others. For example, if Americans buy automobiles from Japan and have no other transactions with Japan, the Japanese must end up holding dollars, which they may hold in the form of bank deposits in the United States or in some other U.S. investment. The payments of Americans to Japan for automobiles are balanced by the payments of Japanese to U.S. individuals and institutions, including banks and businesses, for the acquisition of dollar assets or investments. Put another way, Japan sold the United States automobiles, and the United States sold Japan dollars or dollar-denominated assets such as treasury bills and New York office buildings and investment opportunities. Although the totals of payments and receipts are necessarily equal, there will be inequalities, excesses of payments or receipts called deficits or surpluses in particular kinds of transactions. Thus, there can be a deficit or surplus in any of the following: merchandise trade, goods, services, foreign investment income, unilateral transfers, private investment, the flow of gold and money between central banks and treasuries, or any combination of these or other international transactions. The statement that a country has a deficit or surplus in its so-called balance of payments must refer to some particular class of transactions. So, now we're going to turn. Many different definitions of the balance of payments, deficit or surplus, have been used in the past. Each definition has different implications and purposes. Until about 1973, attention was focused on a definition of the balance of payments intended to measure a country's ability to meet its obligations to exchange its currency for other currencies or for gold at fixed exchange rates. And I'm going to skip over just a little bit. So here we go. So what he talks about here is the difference between He says, since 1973, discussions of the balance of payments, deficit, or surplus usually refer to what is called the current account. This account contains trade in goods and services, investment income earned abroad, and unilateral transfers. It excludes the capital account. So we have two kinds, okay? You've got the current account, and you've got the capital account, okay? And he says, because the current account and the capital account add up to the total account, which is necessarily, by definition, balanced, a deficit in the current account is always accompanied by an equal surplus in the capital account, which is what I was describing, and vice versa. A deficit or surplus in the current account cannot be explained or evaluated without simultaneous explanation and evaluation of equal surplus or deficit in the capital account. And that's why reporters, most of them are ignorant of this, that I found. But politicians, they should know better, okay? A country is more likely to have a deficit in its current account the higher its price level, the higher its gross national product, and the higher its interest rates, the lower its barriers to imports, and the more attractive its investment opportunities, all compared with conditions of other countries, and the higher its exchange rate. So again, it's more likely to have a deficit if it has a higher exchange rate. The effects of a change in one of those factors upon the current account balance cannot be predicted without considering the effect of the other causal factors. For example, if the U.S. government increases tariffs, Americans will buy fewer goods, thus reducing the current account deficit. But economic theory indicates that this reduction will occur only if one of the other factors changes to bring about a decrease in the capital account surplus. If none of these other factors changes, the reduced imports from the tariff increase will cause a decline in the demand for foreign currency, yen, Deutschmarks, etc., which in turn will raise the value of the U.S. dollar. The increase in the value of the dollar will make U.S. exports more expensive and imports cheaper, offsetting the effect of the tariff exchange. So that's a little bit about the current account and the capital account, and it's important to keep in mind. And I want to close off with this about economics. If you go to my profile on X, I want to show you this guy, Jared Bernstein. Now, I've written articles about this guy. He doesn't know anything. He's a White House economic advisor. He had said back last fall, actually last late winter, that he was pretty confident in the position of the United States government. He was good. He felt good about the policies of the United States government. He felt real good about it. And of course, he didn't think there was any inflation at all. This was before they brought him on as economic advisor. Okay. So I want to show you this because it is amazing. Let me see if I can find this for you. This is, hold on a second here. Yeah. I'm going to find this. Oh, there's so much stuff. It's just amazing. Okay. Where is it? Where is it? Yeah, here it is. Okay. Now, this is Jared Bernstein, and he is the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors now. And he was brought on by the Biden administration and literally told, I think it was Maria Bartiromo, that he felt very good. He felt absolutely fine about the position of the United States a year ago and said everything's going to be hunky-dory. He didn't think there was any inflation in any way whatsoever. Watch this. Pete St. Onge retweeted this one, and it just blows me away. I got to put this in here before we open things up because I think I'd love to get your comments even on this. Arnaud Bertrand writes this. This is absolutely priceless and probably the most frightening clip you'll ever watch on the people in charge of the U.S. economy. Jared Bernstein is literally the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, the main agency advising Biden on economic policy. Watch this, everybody. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible.
The U.S. government can't go bankrupt because we can print our own money.
It obviously begs the question, why exactly are we borrowing in a currency that we print ourselves? I'm waiting for someone to stand up and say, why do we borrow our own currency in the first place?
Like you said, they print the dollar. So why does the government even borrow?
Well, I mean, again, some of this stuff gets, some of the language that some of the language and concepts are just confusing. I mean, the government definitely prints money, and it definitely lends that money, which is why the government definitely prints money, and then it lends that money by selling bonds. Is that what they do? They sell bonds. Yeah, they sell bonds, right? Since they sell bonds and people buy the bonds and lend them the money. Yeah. So a lot of times, at least to my ear with MMT, the language and the concepts can be kind of unnecessarily confusing, but there is no question that the government prints money and then it uses that money to yeah, I guess I can't really talk. I don't get it. I don't know what they're talking about. Like, cause it's like the government clearly prints money. It does it all the time, and it clearly borrows. Otherwise we wouldn't be having this debt and deficit conversation. So I don't think there's anything confusing there.
He's exhibiting absolute confusion, and he's like, yeah, so I don't really know. You make a good point, but I don't think there's anything confusing there. He just restates what she said. Well, so the government puts out bonds, but the government prints money. Of course, the government can print its own money through the central bank that Alexander Hamilton got put in there, but they've licensed it out to their monopoly of the Federal Reserve. And that's why Bitcoin has done so well, because people try to get away from it. That's why gold and silver are so important, right? So they can't just print up gold and silver, and the U.S. Treasury can't just do that either. So it's interesting because either way, if the government's doing it or the Fed is doing it, the reason the government issues the bonds is because they'd handed over the money printing power to the Federal Reserve, which buys the bonds. That sort of hides the idea that the government's just printing up the money, right? It's just a shell game. Oh, they're the ones who are doing it now, right? That's why, Jared. That's why. So the MMT people make a process point, which is why bother having the Federal Reserve when the U.S. government can just do it, right? And of course, many free market people say, why have taxes when the government just prints up its own money? Is there a control mechanism here? Yeah, right? So I had to play that for you. Oh, thank you so much, JBA. It says great show today. I'm going to throw the link in right now. Here's the invite, everybody. If you want to join me, hang out with me. I'm going to put this over in Rokfin, and it's in there right now. There you go. And I'm going to put this over at Rumble as well. And take, 2 or 3 people, whatever, a couple seconds. Just let me know, where you are, what's up with you. If you have any comments on any of the stories, anything like that, we'll bring you in. What'll happen is I'll see you in the back room. And then if there's somebody else who's waiting who pops up, then, we'll chat for a little while. We'll have somebody else go out there. Now, this will be sort of an introduction to this. And then later, when I have more time, what I'd really love to do is open it up to you for an hour and have you from, wherever you are, tell me a story about, your location or something that, you'd like people to know down the line, some personal story about something that happened to you that, or a memory you have, a walk in the forest, or one of your favorite ice cream places, a legendary place, some historical marker in Butte, Montana, wherever you are, right? Gold mine or something. Wow, that's a cool story. Or just some amazing thing that a family member did, something that you saw on television. Remember this, remember that. We'll open up for personal stories, and I'd really enjoy that. So feel free to join us. I know many people have to get their cams set up and stuff like that. And of course, all trust here. We're obviously thinking that everybody's, going to be very cool and stuff like that. So we're not going to get any Jeffrey Toobins or anything like that. Now, as I get prepared, I do want to give you this, however, this one to close off the tariff issue from my friend Ben Powell, who's an economist. He says, former President Donald Trump made increasing the tariff rate on many products a major focus of his campaign in 2016, and he's escalating his anti-trade rhetoric again in 2024. Unfortunately, while his trade policies were bad for our economy, they're good for his political prospects. During a recent rally in Ohio, when referring to otherwise duty-free Chinese cars made in Mexico, Mr. Trump declared, "We're going to put 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line, and you're not going to be able to sell those guys if I get elected." Similarly, in February, he confirmed that he planned to reignite a trade war by imposing a 60% tariff across the board on all Chinese imports. When he campaigned with anti-trade rhetoric in 2016, economists could point to more than 200 years of economic theory and practice, also, Ben, dating back to Adam Smith, that indicated his trade policies, Trump's, would shrink incomes in both the United States and China. They also could point to evidence that lower tariffs and increased trade had improved lives in the United States over previous decades. But economists didn't have recent examples of the impact of major tariff increases in the United States because we had been lowering tariffs, not raising them. For decades, they've been doing that in the United States. Now, in 2024, we can examine the results of Trump's first-term trade policies to better evaluate the validity of his trade rhetoric today. During his first term, President Trump imposed tariffs on European goods and made some relatively minor changes in our trade agreement with Canada and Mexico. But this declaration of a trade war with China was his signature change in trade policy. Throughout 2018 and 19, he imposed thousands of tariffs targeting roughly $350 billion in Chinese imports. China retaliated. Remember when everybody says, "Oh, the Chinese backed off, that Trump, he's the negotiator." I just couldn't believe it when I would hear that, because it's against all historical record. China retaliated by imposing tariffs on roughly $100 billion in U.S. exports. A recent National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER, paper by economists Pablo Fajibam and Amit Kawandwal surveyed scores of economic studies that have estimated the consequences of the trade war with China. Their two main takeaways were that, quote, U.S. consumers of imported goods have borne the brunt of the tariffs through higher prices, and that the trade war decreased average incomes in both countries, though this was not large relative to the overall economy. Supporters of Trump's trade policies may be willing to bear the burden of higher prices and lower incomes if U.S. manufacturing jobs are protected. However, his trade policies apparently did not deliver on that either. Another new NBER study by economists David Artur, Ann Beck, David Dorn, and Gordon Hanson found that Trump's tariffs did not increase employment in the regions of the newly protected industries, the washing machine industries, the washer-dryer industries, and so on. They also found that China's retaliatory tariffs decreased agricultural employment in the United States. Their study, and they harmed Chinese buyers, consumers, of course, and left less money in their pocket and more money in the pocket of the Chinese government. Right? Yeah. Their study also pointed to why Trump continues to try to sway Midwestern voters with his anti-trade rhetoric. Voters in districts with firms targeted for protection by his tariffs became less likely to identify as Democrats, more likely to vote to re-elect Donald Trump in 2020, and more likely to elect Republicans to Congress despite the lack of economic benefits in the targeted industries and districts. The political appeal of Trump's rhetoric can be partially explained by voters' difficulty in disentangling the effects of many individual economic policies. The bulk of President Trump's domestic economic policies on taxation, regulation, drilling, and a host of other important issues were pro-growth and led to an economy that raised living standards for the middle class before the pandemic, despite the drag caused by the trade war. Without a solid understanding of economics, voters hearing Trump's rhetoric could easily confuse correlation and causation. In 2018, President Trump declared, quote, "I'm a tariff man," end quote. Until economists do a better job of educating voters about the harmful effects of tariffs, Trump is likely to continue to be a tariff man. Unfortunately, good politics often runs counter to good economics. So true. Absolutely right. And I think it's a very valuable thing. I appreciate Ben's a friend of mine. He taught at Tufts first when he first got out of grad school. He's a really good guy. He co-wrote a book called Socialism Sucks, and he was in the documentary that I did on collectivism for MRC TV, as was David Knight, as was Larry Reed, the president of the Foundation for Economic Education. And yeah, these are the sorts of things. In fact, we ended the video series, 11-part series on collectivism at the cemetery where my mother and father's gravestone is located. And, I thought about how my father had fought against collectivism both in World War II, and of course the United States engaged in a great deal of collectivism to gather up all the resources and send the troops out and all that sort of thing. And a lot of people didn't really think about that at the time, and it really grew the nation state's power over people and power over industries. And a lot of favorites were handed out that secured things on the national, city, political, state side for decades with the parties. But I thought about how my father fought very hard against collectivism in economic theory, collectivism in philosophy, and the rights of the individual. And I think it's valuable every once in a while. I think about my father, and to try to continue to peacefully express those principles of free market economics that often get sort of lost in the populist or patriotic notions or defense notions, or the specific, well, they're hardworking blue collar people rhetoric or whatever, because that rhetoric is very easy rhetoric. And I find that it's important to just bring up these principles. They're clean principles. And one of the final things I'll just mention is, if we're talking about the so-called talking about the balance of trade or the so-called trade deficit, one of the big problems that I saw coming, and I wrote about it before the crash came in 2008. I was trying to warn people. I think I wrote it in 2005 or 2006 for the Mises Institute. And you can look up the article. It's called "The Deflation Dog Didn't Bite After All." And what I said was that after the 2001 attacks, a lot of exporting interests in the United States approached the Bush administration, W. Bush, and said, we need a policy. We want a policy. The United States dollar is too strong compared to other currencies out there. We want you to get the Federal Reserve to pursue a policy of low interest rates. Of course. Now, what would that do? That would mean, of course, that there's less value to the dollars that you're going to be holding on to, because they're going to be pumping in more easy liquidity. It's going to be easier to get loans. Every one of the banks that services, it's now daily. It used to be weekly exchanges to balance their books. If they need to get loans from other people, then the Fed's funds rates would be near zero. So more money would go out. And what happens? You get more money being given to people by the Federal Reserve. You get people getting loans for projects that they shouldn't be getting because the banks know they can get easy money. And what did you see? You saw people getting homes at near 0% interest rates with variable rate mortgages from about 2001 on. And I wrote about it. I was like, this is going to lead to problems. The value of the dollar was not artificially high. They kept complaining about deflation. And literally, I wrote about it. They were ringing that bell late 2001, 2002. And throughout 2002, they pushed because they said, oh, there's a deflation problem. Deflation is not some ridiculously high value of your currency that is causing prices to be too low. That's not deflation. Okay, deflation is when a government artificially decreases the amount of money that's out there. Like inflation is an artificial increase of the money supply. Deflation is an artificial, unnatural decrease in the money supply compared to goods. Okay? If you have a competitive marketplace and you have real honest banks, or let's say you even had a Federal Reserve that was a central bank and they pursued a 0% inflation rate, at a 0% inflation rate, what you would see is decreasing prices over time as businesses become more productive, as consumers produce what they produce so well. They produce savings, they produce investments. And those would be available to people at lower and lower interest rates because they would be more available to people. But those would be honest savings. And so prices would go down for everything. As I mentioned, there's a very, very good book called Less Than Zero that was published by the Institute for Economic Affairs on Lord North Street, right around the corner from the Parliament building. Now, as I said, when I went to London for the first time, that's the first place I went. It was like 9:15. They had just opened, and I walked in with my bags coming from the airport. And I was like, hey, can I get some books here? And they're like, wow, what are you doing here? It's like, I love your stuff. I get it from the US, and I figured I'd love to get some stuff. And then I went over to the Adam Smith Institute, which is right around the corner. And I visited with them. They were really nice too. And so they published this book called Less Than Zero. In a natural marketplace, you would actually have real interest rates that would actually, prices would go down. Prices would go down because of productivity gains. You would see prices decrease. And the only thing that fights for us to help fight against the inflation of the money supply, to at least slow down the increase of the prices, is the tremendous capacity of consumers and sellers to try to find ways to cut their expenses, to be more productive. That's the only thing that pours sand into this ocean of money that they're pouring at us. So if we could privatize the monetary system, allow for private competing banks to issue their own currency, then you wouldn't see so many people out there who are having a difficult time affording things, because prices would go down, investment in new things would occur. With a central bank, you get what you saw in 2002, which was pursuit of a near 0% interest rate and the eventual 2008 crash, because they had inflated the money supply so dramatically, and it had gone into all these crazy investments. That's where the toxic mortgages came from, because all these houses were built. Those are resources that never should have been applied there. It's a misallocation of resources, and you get toxic mortgages afterwards. It's the moral hazard of central banking. It always ends up inspiring the boom-bust cycle, and it can be avoided if people can just be honest in their dealings with each other on money. Just have an honest banking system and get it away from government, right? So anyway, I hope that's interesting for everybody. And it looks like nobody's joined us inside chat. I hope I didn't miss anything. I don't think I did. Okay. Chris is getting sick. Chris, I hope you feel okay, man. I was hoping he would come in. He says, I'm not feeling good right now. So Chris, okay, I'm sorry, man. I hope you feel okay, man. I will pray for you, buddy. I hope it's not too serious. Now, inside comments, written comments. Yeah. Mr. Bicycle, boy, is that a great point. I'm so glad you brought that up. And this is really where they're going. You got the end game right there, and I didn't open my eyes to that and present it. So this is perfect. Awesome. The conspiracy is working. Mr. Bicycle says, works for the banks wanting to buy up land. You got it. Especially if they can be subsidized and they can sell off their toxic mortgages and still stay afloat, thanks to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And they got $1 billion in bailouts, $1 trillion in bailouts, 500 billion each since 2008. And Mr. Bicycle says, we don't get to see the market, or we don't get to see market or tech gains because they just tax that surplus value out. Boy, is that a good point. And also they regulate it out as well. Look what they're doing with light bulbs and all these other things, forcing people to have to spend more money on stuff they could buy more cheaply and saying, oh, we're saving you money. Please. As my father said, don't spit in my face and call it rain, right? I know some people use a slightly different terminology from Clint Eastwood movie, I think, but it was Outlaw Josie Wales. And yeah. Mr. Bicycle, I think you're commenting on Jared Bernstein. He says, AI, give me a smart sounding answer on how this all works. Classic. All right, I better hit the road. Thank you for hanging. This is great. And yeah, it's been great. I think, packaged in a couple different pieces, but really, really good stuff tonight. I'll see you in the chat tomorrow at 10 a.m. for Knights of the Storm. And again, thank you so much for your contributions. Just wonderful. And I don't know, do you guys think that I should mention when I come up with what I'm hoping for a budget each week, like, okay, I'm hoping that I can get this at the end of the month or the end of the week or whatever. I'm a little hesitant about that. I'm not sure whether I should do it, because I want to provide you with good stuff, right? So I'll think about it, at the end of the week, like, I was hoping to hit like, $40 this week or whatever. I don't know. I don't want to sound like, really easy going about it, but yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. I mean, we'll see. Maybe when we go super national with our banking interests, they'll be putting money into all of our pockets, and you guys can write questions that they direct, Jared Bernstein can write the questions for you. They might sound really stupid, but hey, you'd have a lot smarter questions than Jared Bernstein. That's for darn sure. I'm confused. I understand, Jared. I get it. I understand. I think I might be writing about that this weekend for MRC TV. That'll be a fun one. I've already nailed them a couple times. I think that'll be a lot of fun. All right, I'm going to hit the road, make some dinner. It's me and the cat tonight. I got to give her some medicine. So have a great night, everybody. Thank you again for hanging out. And we'll open up the chat again next week. We'll do a giveaway next week. It's going to be a great time. And do definitely enjoy the night. And I will talk to you tomorrow inside chat for the Knights. And then America Unplugged.